Okay, this is Thorin for On Gamers, and this should be episode 3 of Counterpoints. And this episode, first of all, listen, I'm not going to lie to you viewers. I like to get like a big name pro on to really bring the viewers in and make it feel like, you know, I like to balance a pro out with like an analyst or something. Obviously this week I couldn't get a pro gamer. That's why I've got 2 guys here who have nothing to do with being pro gamers, probably terrible in game. And so it's 3 people who don't play the game, so you know that, okay, it's a lean week for star power.
Get out of here.
But we're going to make up for that by having really good chat. What we're going to use our brains more, okay? So let me give an intro. And before I just intro the people, I've got to tell people that the theme of this episode is going to be about... Because normally, the reason why I don't do this show every week is there's not that many big LAN events. And LAN events, to me, the most interesting thing to talk about in CSGO. So if there aren't big LAN events, you need like something else big to happen. And so we had that like last week or so was when this French Revolution went down. These 3 teams all got mixed up and jumbled up. And at the end, we had all the same players, but on different teams. And so I thought, well, there's more than just one lineup there. There's a whole bunch of things you can talk about and angles you can go out. So in light of that, here's my introduction. I've got these 2 people as a result to talk about this. So we'll start off with Semmler here. On Fire Semmler, as he calls himself. What I love about that name, Semmler, is that every time I see your name, I'm like, that's great branding. On Fire Semmler, I know exactly what it's about. You're from Room on Fire. And then I think, right, now I'll just type in On Fire Anders. Oh, that's taken. Like, that is just brilliant. I love the idea that you planned, you prepared, you marketed, and then you were like, oh, the Facebook's taken, the Twitter's taken. Is anything available? Oh, mine is. Yeah, okay. So I've got Semmler here, and the reason I've brought Semmler on, okay, is because a lot of you probably you'll hear him talk and you'll think, oh, that's an American. But actually, Semmler secretly thinks he's French, okay? I don't know, like his mom's French or something, or he wears a beret or something. I don't know. So, yeah, something like that. The details aren't important, Semmler. So the point is, like all Americans, you don't actually... On July 4th, you call yourself American, okay? But the secret about all Americans that I've learned is that never ask a fucking American what his heritage is. Because he won't say, like, oh, I'm American. He'll be like, well, I'm 1/16th Bulgarian, 8th Hungarian. Family comes from Germany originally. I think the name dates back to Italy because America's such a new country. Everyone's a bit like insecure about not having like a really good heritage. Whereas if you ask me, I'm like, I'm from England, mate. End of story. You know, there's no big backstory there. So the point I'm getting to here is Semmler secretly thinks he's French. Now, French people, if there's one thing they hate, it's sort of a half-caste type of guy. So they don't give a fuck about people who might have come from France. They only care about French people now speaking French. But as a result, Semmler has contacts. He can speak French. I've heard him do stuff from interviews. He knows the French players, so he has an in. He's for the Western-speaking world, he's like our double agent, okay?
I have a fucking passport, man.
Yeah, he's like a reverse Benedict Arnold. He's going undercover for us to get the information back for us, okay? So, hello, Semmler. I know that's a glowing introduction, right?
It really was, man. It really was. So, my dad is French. Okay. I was partly raised in France. Half of my family is French. So, the secret, you know, secretly French, okay. I think it's kind of pretty clear. I'll go get my beret. I left it at my place. I didn't know we were doing this tonight, so I should have had the hat. I should have had the hat for this. But thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to the discussion regarding the French teams. And, you know, all these guys that I know so well.
And then my other guest is DDK. And now, who the fuck is DDK, you might be asking? Well, maybe he's that guy that you don't know the name of, who you're like, who is this shit caster? Get Anderson Semmler on. Minus Face It plus Room on Fire. You know, that guy. You remember him now? No, DDK is a guy who comes from Quake. He played a bit of StarCraft once upon a time. Probably thinks he's good at that. He isn't. Watched StarCraft 2 for a while. Stopped watching StarCraft 2 at exactly the point it got good. Not sure how that works. He's a guy who's played every game, okay? He's a jack of all trades. Just leave that analogy there. And hello, DDK.
Hello. I can't believe you left out Quake World, which is like close to your heart.
People on the show don't know what the fuck Quake World is. No one watching this show knows. I know what it is, but no one else does. I love Quake World. I don't even know what it is. Plus, also, you're sort of like Semmler in that respect. You came to Quake World in like 2010 or something, bro. That was like 13 years after it got going. You're like, hey, I love the Rolling Stones. Like, I went to see them. They're sick in concert. When did you go? 2013. I think they might have been past their peak then, I believe. The best concert might have been 35 years before DDK. So anyway, DDK's a commentator, Semmler's a commentator, I sometimes commentate. Who's the most hated amongst all of us? We'll leave that for the forums to decide. So the reason I got DDK on here is because actually, people won't know this, because he plays like the fall guy, the play-by-play guy who has to ask the stupid questions and has to like put forward a theory that the expert gets to like espouse his opinion on and stuff. It makes DDK look like he's an idiot, right? Like a lot of the play-by-play guys are, unfortunately. But actually, DDK is quite a deep thinker.
I am an idiot. Oh, right.
Sorry. In your own way, you are. But we're not talking about socially here, mate. We're just talking about with games, okay? So with games, you're actually a bit of a cerebral thinker. You like to break down metagame and think about the. So I thought, okay, this will be, even though he's not a super CS expert, you are in CS, so you know the teams. And as a result, maybe you have a different way of thinking about how to compose a team. Because that's a key thing I want us to focus on while we have this discussion about the teams. Yeah, we're going to discuss players and which player is stronger or what style will they have. But I also think like composing a team, that's like an interesting concept in itself. You know, how much aim do you want? How much team play do you want? What's the tactical role? So let's start right there, okay? For everyone who somehow doesn't follow the internet, the 3 teams that happened was, so before the change, we had Titan, MBK, Kenny S, Existence, you all know the names. We had LDLC, who finished top 4 at ESL 1 Cologne. That was Apex, and it was Kaylee, and a bunch of people who aren't as good as them. And then we had, finally, the 3rd team was Epsilon, and that was like Shocks and the backing singers. So before we go into the lineup changes, let's go around the table here and ask, like, what did you think of those 3 teams before? Like, how did you conceive of those 2 teams? Like, this is how strong they are, or this is what their strengths are. So start with you, Semmler. Let's start with Titan. What did you think of the last era of Titan, the last lineup?
Well, let's say Kenny S lineup then.
Yeah, the one that went to ESL 1 Cologne, sure.
Yeah, okay. That was that lineup. Obviously, well, I have to turn the music on there off in the background. I have to turn it off. All right. So the Titan lineup that we had at the beginning of this year, basically when Kenny S joined up, and they, you know, Shoxy bowed out because of this whole team house thing and everything. I felt like it was an interesting lineup, but it was never going to be like the lineup that managed to put them ahead of the rest of the teams out there, because it was a lineup that kind of relied on a gimmick, which was Kenny S. And this is, you know, was admitted by themselves, you know, that they were basing most of their tactics around Kenny S. Talking with Kenny S, he would be the main man calling as well a lot of the time, based on the information that he would get, because he was holding that point role for the team. So I always felt like the Titan, you know, it was live or die off of Kenny's ability to get frags and make things happen for the team. And if he was having an off night, you weren't seeing a very good Titan. But if he was on, well, he's on for like a half, and then Titan looked really, really scary because of the Kenny S show.
Okay, stop right there somewhere. That just sent chills down my fucking spine there. The idea that you have Existence in your team, but you're having some of the calls in any sense come from Kenny S. Because here's the thing, right? Kenny S is like an amazing mechanical player. His skills are fucking nuts. And if you let him do his thing, Kenny S knows how to do Kenny S okay. But actually, when I've watched a lot of games of Kenny S, when he was in Titan, when he wasn't in Titan, when he was in very games, and when I watched him in all these teams, he looks like a player where if I had to guess, I'd say his comms are fucking terrible. Like, they just put him on one side of the map. Like, think about when he plays Nuke and he plays outside. There are times that he is really slow to rotate inside. Like a cerebral player would kind of guess, like you have to kind of predict that the call's going to come to rotate, okay, and be kind of ready for it. Whereas he seemed like he was the last to come. He reminds me of Dosia in that sense. Like, it looks like their comms are really bad, but the thing is their skills are so crazy that the team, usually you want to work around that by doing that, by giving him like a spot over here where he sits, and you know he just does his thing, and then the rest of you kind of work together, and then you know in advance, right, he's not going to be the first to come around when we call the rotation, so you kind of build that in. But the crucial thing there is you're kind of putting them off to a side because you know they can't be that big a role in communication. So the idea that he's then going to call stuff while aiming as well and doing his sniping, that sounds like a recipe for disaster right off the bat, doesn't it?
Well, this was right at the beginning, and this is why you were kind of worried about it. You were like, okay, Kenny S, obviously one of the best players, if not one of the best oppers. I don't know. It's like any given day, if it's going to be Kenny or Guardian, called as the best op in the world right now. But, you know, it's just, you can't build your whole strat around just the one player like that. And that's kind of what Titan were deciding to do, is we're going to give Kenny an op. We're going to let him go and do his thing. A lot of our calls are going to be based off of what he sees, whether they're coming from Kenny or they're coming from Existence. It really was, you know, we're going to go ahead and let Kenny get to it. Now it's like the 2020 hindsight sort of moment where you take a step back and you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is why the team was never going to fully function, is if they can't actually get off the ground with Kenny, it's just not going to happen for the team. And I feel like that's what we saw throughout the entire year. You know, they had that breakout performance in G3 recently going into Gamescom, but that was it. And then they went into Gamescom and got completely shattered in the groups. So again, just the strategy, what they decided to do with their team did not work.
I mean, I can get why they would try it, okay? Because actually, first of all, before they got 10ES, Titan had been trying everything and it hadn't been working even when they had the good Shocks lineup. Secondly, they had Kenny S in very games way back in the past, and that was the criticism that people had, rightfully so. Like, this guy's awesome, he can even be awesome, but somehow he doesn't work within the team. Like, he's not integrated. So it feels like...
He's not experienced enough. That's the thing. You mentioned it with the comms, but it's another thing. It's just like he's... when he came back onto that team, it was, crossing your fingers, hoping that he'd had time to mature elsewhere in the scene, right? On the other top teams in France, that were competing at these lands. You're hoping that Kenny is going to be the guy who has matured over time. They bring him back onto the Titan lineup, and now he's got the skill, but he's got some more experience too. But I still don't feel like it's up there where he's confident enough in himself to be able to carry a team like Titan with all of those guys on there.
But that's why I can see lineup. That's why I can see why they took the gamble, though, because obviously, like, if you're going to bring him back, you can't use the old method and just have it not be effective. You're trying to build something around him, okay? But sure. I think what kind of you're saying is they went too far with it, okay? They didn't just give him a role; they made the whole team about him. And if you actually think about the ups and downs of their team while they had him, because actually they had every tournament they would have like a good performance except for ESL1. Like there was the Star Ladder where actually they were doing pretty decent, and they got beaten by NiP. And then there was the DreamHack Summer, obviously, where again they had to lost to NiP, who in theory were the best team. And then they had this nice run at G3, and then obviously ESL1 was a disaster. But those main tournaments there, they had moments they were good. If you think about it, that's the problem in building everything around an AWPer. Because even the best AWPer in the world, unfortunately in CSGO, it's not a game where you can just totally dominate all the time with the AWPer.
Okay.
You're going to be hit and miss just based on the AWPer.
But here's the main problem with the whole basing it around the AWPer, and in particular for Titan. You're still trying to run, like Titan are still trying to run a very precise execution on things. They're going to Kenny and they're like, okay, Kenny, you have a longer leash than we let you have before, but you're still on a leash because we still kind of want to do this, right? And that's just not going to fit with a player like Kenny. Like a player like Kenny needs to just be, snip, go run free, be crazy, go live your inner Chris J and just, peak angles, go push like a madman, do crazy shit because that's what you do and that's what you excel at, and that's when you're in your element, is when you're getting up in that team's face and you're 1v5ing them. But that's never going to happen with a leader like Existence. He needs to have too much control on what's actually happening in the team. Everything has to happen a certain way that for players that need that freedom, it's just not going to mesh. They're not going to mesh. And that's going into this new lineup. We're going to talk a little bit about it later, but like going into this new lineup, I don't feel like they've addressed that again. I feel like they're doing the same thing over again.
Yeah, one thing actually about something like that as well is that there are lots of spots where players like this make themselves look a lot better than they actually are, because what they're doing is essentially taking, like, let's say minus EV plays, if you want to go, all poker on it, and they, here and there they actually make the play work, when in reality they should be playing, making safer plays and so on and so forth. And that's why it can go really badly. And it can be really bad with AWPers too, because obviously AWPing as an AWPer, it's worth a lot of money. There's a lot of value on a player who picks that weapon up. So to take risks with it and to try to use it in strange spots and stuff like that, if it works, everyone's going to remember the time that it worked and how amazing it was. And sure. Kenny S and these players are amazing at doing these really awkward back against the wall type plays where they throw out all these hip shots and stuff, and it looks great and so on and so forth. But I think sometimes people remember that a little bit too much, and in some situations it's even teams overrate their star players in that sense, almost putting too much weight on them, as you were saying with Titan and Kenny S. And when you do something like that, you have this inherent instability in your own team's economic situation, and as far as strategies goes, it can really throw things off as well. So I do kind of agree with the Kenny S thing. With Titan, it kept going through phases of me where it's like, is it working yet? Is it working yet? Because it should be working. Why is it not working? So and then that kept happening for me again and again. But
when you look at the lineup, you're just like, these players, they should just dominate. Like, they have one of the best ops. They have one of the, they have great end game sense. They have all of this sort of stuff, like fine riflers, and yet never really managing to mesh. They never really managed to click. And it was just like G3 that won like the swan song, I guess, because going into Gamescom, man, it was a totally different story. It just did not pan out on the major stage again.
I mean, the thing with that team as well for me is like, I'll give the analogy of what they did by bringing Kenny S in and doing that. It's like if you had a football team, okay? I'll give you a perfect example as a team like Liverpool Football Club, okay? Where they never actually have as much money as like a Real Madrid or something. So they can't buy all the good players at all the positions to have a super solid team. So what they've tended to do, okay, is try and have like 1 or 2 star players, like have a star striker. So say you have a team where fundamentally you can't be the best. Like you don't have the best system, you don't have the best defense, but you bring in like a striker who can score 30 goals. If he scores the 30 goals, you're going to have a bunch of games you'll win where you probably shouldn't have. And it'll make you look like, well, they're on the brink of getting through. Whereas actually, that's the max you could have got out of that team. Is that guy did everything he could to cover the holes, okay? So as a result, you bring Kenny S in. Yeah, in the short term, it's going to fix the problem Titan has, which is they can never get past, well, they would get down to like coming like 9th place and stuff, you know. If you want to have a chance to win big games and come to the semi-finals, that's exactly what you do. Bring in a guy who's just a big game player and he's going to have games he goes crazy. But if you want to win best of 3s over the best teams in the world, that's not going to work consistently.
Consistency.
Like think of the think of even the G3 win. Here's the key thing. The 2 teams they beat to get to the final, AWPer basically just fell apart towards the end of that. It's not like AWPer was some super elite team. They kind of were a bit shaky themselves. And then Fnatic, that was their first event. Like Fnatic was good in that series, but it was their first event. It looked like they hadn't quite figured stuff out to the extent they had by Cologne had come, okay? So it'd be one thing if they'd have beaten like NiP in a best of 3 and they'd have beaten Dignitas. Then I'd have given the G3 one a lot more weight, you know, and said like, wow, that's like, if you can just repeat that. Whereas actually I feel like now, it would be bad to think like, oh, if we can just do what we did at G3, because I don't even know if you'd get that sort of a bracket again, you know, that those teams that you played don't exist in that sense, you know.
No, we saw what happened in the groups. I mean, Dignitas, that nuke. Well, again, it's just like, it's just painful to think about it that they get nuke as the deciding map, and Dignitas starts CT in Gamescom. That's just horrendous. When you have one map, that's what your tournament's riding on, and in your T half, and you're going in cold. You can't do anything. You get rolled by the best CT side nuke team in the world, pretty much. That's a very sad situation to find yourselves in, and I think that's definitely what happened. After Gamescom, it's just like, you know, they probably looked at that and were just like, no, we can't.
So to follow the analogy, okay, what you'd want to do with that sort of a team is, yeah, have the star player, like the star striker, but you want to have a solid enough system behind him that in theory, on the games he can't score all the goals, you can still like draw or win in a football analogy. But when he then goes crazy, that puts you over the top. That's how I think AWPer should be used in CSGO. Because another team that's done it is Na'Vi. And Na'Vi is super up and down and inconsistent, partly because the games that Guardian's a fucking monster. He's like the ultimate minus EV player. He takes shots that are so fast that like no one can hit those all the time, man. Like when you don't, then the T's are going to get into the site when you're on CT, and now you've been overrun and you have to pull back and save the AWP and stuff. These are actually not very good plays to do. Now then, the times he hits them, they're so incredible that just breaks the enemy apart, and you think, wow, if we could just do this every time, but no one can, you know. It doesn't work. It doesn't. That's why it's a minus EV play. In the long run, if you play it 100 times, it won't play out in your favor enough. Okay, so I actually think those teams over rely on the AWPer. Like the better way would be to have like a solid system, and then that's why you let the AWPer do his free reign thing, because then the idea is he doesn't have to contribute a specific thing to make the round work. But if he does, then we're laughing, you know. Then we're going to be monsters. That's why actually I think a lot of the good teams.
That's why NiP.
Yeah. NiP. Well, think of NiP and Dignitas. They don't have to have their AWPers play with AWPs or even hit. But when they do, and they're AWPing and the team's working, they roll you over. There's nothing you can do.
VP as well, in a way. You know, VP as well. You know, Pasha can pick up his AWP, and he can be very good with it. But at the same time, he can just walk in with his rifle. They could go 5 rifle, and it's not going to impact their strategy. Same thing for NiP. Same thing for Dignitas. These top teams, like they've really taken the AWP out of the spotlight, and they say, if you can AWP, fantastic, we're going to figure out a way to make it work. But what we're really focusing on here is just 5 smart players with rifles that are going to be able to take a site and land the shots and make the right decisions at the right time. Yeah, and that's why we see these teams consistently getting, you know, top 4, is because that seems to be the way to go right now. Look at Cloud9 as well. I mean, and if they didn't run into NiP quarterfinals again. But, you know, it's like they have an AWPer, but they don't really. It's really just 5 guys with rifles. So it's just, it seems like that's the way that it's shifting right now with the game. And that's why Titan struggled, is because they did put a lot of emphasis on Kenny. And it's just not consistent enough to be able to get you wins in tournaments. So it'll get you a best of 3, but will it get you the title? Probably not.
Put it this way, if I had to pick my best teams right now, ignoring these French lineups, I would have gone with teams who can all just play 5 rifles, and that actually will be a strength. Like, so I'd have NiP, Virtus Pro, I'd have Fnatic, I'd have, let me think who else. Dignitas. These 4 teams can all play just 5 rifles, and actually that's sometimes when they're at their best. But they can all also incorporate the AWP. The idea is it's not one extreme.
Exactly.
But look at Na'Vi. How could Na'Vi go a whole best of 3 without Guardian using them? It wouldn't work. At least the way they use it, you know.
Yeah, with the way that that's kind of like the choice with Guardian. The one thing that's the redeeming factor is that Guardian is also goddamn terrifying with a rifle as well. So I feel like Na'Vi is a bit more of a weird choice because they have a very unique style of play, which is we're gonna wait until there's 20 seconds left on our T side round and then start. And we're just so good at executing this one strategy that we'll get onto that site even if there's 20 seconds left. It's fine. So they play a style that really forces the opponents to have perfect decision making, because the opponent has to know exactly what Na'Vi are going to do with 20 seconds left on the clock, or they're going to lose the round because Na'Vi are going to run into the site. There's only going to be like one guy, be Inferno. There's going to be one guy on the site, one guy in CT. That guy on CT gets smoked out. You have one guy left. You got 4 Na'Vi guys rushing up on you. You're dead. And if you didn't make the right call and had that third guy close by in CT to spray through the smoke, you're just not going to get through. Like, you're not going to be able to hold off Na'Vi. Like, I forget the point, but like the point was that it's basically that Na'Vi, that
Guardian doesn't have to have an op.
Exactly, Guardian doesn't have to have an op. They're so solid strategically and with their execution that they can.
But that's also the problem with how these teams choose to use the player, which is what we originally were talking about with Titan, which is that if you have Kenny S, like I'm saying, I understand why you base the team around him to a degree, because with Kenny S, what's the point in having Kenny S in the team if you're not going to put an AWP in his hand all the time? He's a player where every time you have the money, you should put the AWP in his hands. That's the whole point of having him there. Okay, with Guardian, you have a point. He can play with a rifle. The difference is, They never would think that way. Guardian's still going to buy the AWP every time he gets a chance. In his case, you could play it differently, but they're not going to. Okay, so that's almost a moot point. I understand what you mean, though, technically. Do you have a point, DDK?
Yeah, I have this problem with Fnatic sometimes as well, because if you look at, like, I've seen a lot of demos with Fnatic and their new lineup and everything, and this is besides the point, but I feel like it's really good now that JW is kind of out of the star role, because I feel like oftentimes you see him, like, for example, on T side in Inferno, it feels like Fnatic are trying to put an AWP in his hands as much as possible, T-side Inferno, and it's really great to see them when they face up against a team like Virtus Pro, because Virtus Pro actually think about the money system, and they actually they have some of the best theory when it comes to playing the CT side and understanding the principles behind getting edges there. And if you look at, so let's just do this example. So JW picks up an AWP against Virtus Pro, so everyone has money. Virtus Pro aren't going to peek him on mid. They just won't do that. They just won't do that, because Inferno is a map where the terrorists have to flash you in to get flash your teammates in to get angles. You can't just find open angels like you can on Dust 2. These are very fundamental differences between the two maps. So JW, he will get nothing on mid, guaranteed. Banana, he's likely to get nothing on mid, unless he's lucky to shoot through a smoke. Like, that AWP is completely useless until his teammates have set him up somewhere. So you get all these awkward situations where if he had an AK, he'd have way more options. And so like there's that again, like, it feels like a lot of teams kind of ignore some of these basic principles and kind of hamstring themselves by trying to identify players too much with the AWP, for example, which is kind of weird in some spots.
Okay, so we've done Titan a bit there. Let's go to the Epsilon team next. So how did you see Epsilon, Semmler?
Epsilon was Shoxy, essentially. But Shoxy in more ways than one, because Shoxy, this is why we saw them struggle, and we saw Shoxy struggle. And a lot of people looked at him and like, it's Shoxalon, and sometimes he would have those sick matches, but most of the time, he just has so much. He had so much pressure on him because he is the one who he's the one with the experience. He's the one who's trying to teach these guys. He's trying to show them how the game is supposed to be played. He's supposed to make sure that they can actually play together as a team. Like, he had just so much to actually make that team work, that then when it came to game time, he struggled quite a bit. You could see it in his play. You weren't seeing the dominant Shoxy. You were seeing a Shoxy who was kind of in the middle, and then Kyoshima would have like a breakout game or something like that, or FXO got added to the roster and they started to go crazy there.
I feel like his heart wasn't in it a lot of the time.
It's not that
it wasn't the right fit.
In it. It's just that there was so much for him to do on that team. I think more so than anything. I think there was just a whole lot of work for him to do on that team, and it was just a lack of experience, I think, from a lot of people, and that sort of thing, where you can see that maybe this is where it's going to be the struggle, and are they going to be able to make it, because it's going to take 3 months to really get up to snuff. But we see them we see them play out of their minds. Kyoshima in the group stage basically, gave them that seed, and they actually put up a decent fight in the quarterfinals as well. So you can see the potential there. You can just see like they aren't up to the level that LDLC are up to. And that's the thing. It's like it was very clearly at the end there, before all these roster changes, it was very clearly LDLC, Epsilon, Titan, I think, in how things stood.
What do you think, DDK? What about Epsilon?
Epsilon, they seem to have it didn't feel like a team that had a lot of longevity in it, because I don't know, I just had this feeling that it was very kind of, you know, put together, and they had a lot of individual skill on it, but it felt like they were kind of free rolling it, just free forming it rather. And so it was really hard to really pinpoint exactly what their potential was like, because it felt like a lot of it was on shocks and just individual skill coming out and had them having the right day, as opposed to a team like LDLC who were grinding it from like 5-6 months ago. They were grinding it, and they weren't just grinding it insofar as, okay, we're playing a lot. They were analyzing their game a lot. They had a leader that was, you know, making strategies. They had good team, their team gelled, and they had the best player in the world, Uzi, right? Thorin, your favorite player?
I'll just leave that hanging out there. You finished that point there?
I think Uzi actually did come into his own with the help of those teammates, because we know very clearly that he was not the experienced team.
Listen, when we talk about the new lineup, we'll definitely get onto the Uzi topic. I can promise you that, Semmler. But
sure.
You have anything else to say?
Looking back at the old old lineup of LDLC, that was definitely Uzi coming into his own, because he was given a role that he could fill. And then you could tell that he was just getting more and more confident in his play and filling that role even better and better for LDLC. I think LDLC were perfectly happy with how Uzi was performing on that team.
Okay, but like as I said, DDK, we were talking about Epsilon there.
Yeah, we're talking about
sorry.
If you can stay on track here.
Yeah. The bottom line for me with Epsilon was that their old lineup was basically just a lot of individual skill, and they just went with it, very free form. So for me, it's hard to really. I don't think that they had a long future with that lineup. Personally, because I just didn't see the kind of team commitment, and there's too many players, you know, jumping in, leaving. It didn't feel like very good from like looking at the results. It seemed a bit random, but you could see the skill there though and the experience. So
yeah, I mean, actually, I'll kind of go to Semmler's point first. When he was talking about like shocks, that's the way I thought of Epsilon as well. Like I looked at it and I was like, well, Epsilon before used to be the Kenny S show. And the only reason you watched Epsilon was you were like, I hope Kenny S gets 30 frags. I don't care if they win or lose. I just hope Kenny S has the AWP every round and he gets 30 frags. That's, you know, I know they're not going to win, so that's all I'm looking for. Then when Shocks joined, I was like, great. Okay, Shocks has realised like he can't be a full-time pro in Titan. It's too much commitment, you know. But he wants to keep his foot in the door. He wants to play some get tournaments every few months, you know. So okay, cool. Let's just have him do the Kenny S thing. Like it's going to be the Shocks show. Everything's set up so that Shocks can go crazy. And I'm like, well, I've seen what he can do in very games, you know. So it's going to be awesome. I'm going to see him dropping 35. He's going to have 1v4s every time he wins. It's going to be awesome.
It's and better, instead, because I watched teammates die, so that star player gets to make more frags. Yeah. It's a perfect situation.
But I watched the games and the first tournament. I was like, this is shit. This is like he's not doing any of the stuff he did in very games. Actually, he's in bad positions a lot of the time where it's like that position doesn't even make sense for what I know Shocks' strengths are. And like it's almost like I thought like, okay, this team doesn't know how to use him and he doesn't even know his own strengths. But what's funny is as I watched Epsilon more and more, I actually kind of like admire what Shocks was trying to do, even though I think it was actually a bit naive, which is that I think he actually thought to himself, like, okay, this team isn't good enough right now to be really good, okay. But in theory, I can do almost everything in the game. So there's two ways you can use a star player. You can either give him everything he wants and make him like the lightning rod and he'll do everything, okay. We're going to max him out. Or you can use a star player to fill in gaps of things other people can't do and go, okay, this guy's not very strong at that. If I leave him to do that, he's going to fail for sure and we'll lose the match. I can do it. I won't be as good as I would be at my star player role, but I can do it better than he can. And maybe I can give him a spot or a position he likes more, okay. I think that's the road Shocks went. Like he was thinking to himself, okay, we're not that great now, but 6 months from now, if we could get the right combo and the right mix, and let's recruit this guy, that didn't quite work, let's recruit another guy. If we can just get like someone else who can add a bit of the fragging, which that's the key part they never really got in Epsilon. They kept trying to get the second fragger and they couldn't really do it. Then Shocks can be like Shocks is basically trying to be like the NBK was in Titan, where NBK could be like a superstar player if he wants to be, but instead he's kind of settled to that role of like, okay, we've got superstars, so instead why don't I like take some of the pressure off other people and fill in this gap over here and do this here because I have the skills to maybe do it better than a role player would. I felt like that's what Shocks embraced, and so on one level you look at the results and you're like, they weren't super great, they had some okay results, but if that was possible, if you could have stuck with the same team for a year, I could see how there is a reasoning there, I think, as to why he was doing that. Especially when I then found out that, okay, actually, apparently he's like doing some in-game leading now, and he's getting to choose where people go. Now it sort of made sense a bit. Whereas before, I was thinking like that, like they just don't know how to use him, and then for some reason he's not complaining, you know. Because I was thinking to myself, if he's going to do the short-term sort of thing and just try and frag, then he should be sort of saying, listen, guys, like I get that we have a team, but I'm the star. Like you have to make things how I want them. And obviously he wasn't going that route either. So that's kind of how I saw it, and there was a logic to it. If we go now to LDLC, you kind of briefly touched on it there, but Semmler, how did you see LDLC overall before?
Definitely a top 4 potential, top 6 team for sure. Like LDLC were just looking even better and better each tournament throughout the entire year. You just saw them progressively getting better and better, which is why I think we were all just so shocked when they did announce their reshuffle, that they were going to be breaking the team, shredding it, 3 players off the roster. It's just I don't think any of us saw it coming. You know, you're thinking, okay, after Gamescom, once the dust settles, like, okay, Epsilon and Titan, yeah, you could probably see some moving happening there, certainly from Titan, because again, they don't get out of a group set of major. Like something has to give. Epsilon, you know, they're young enough, right? They're still trying to shift their rosters around, all that sort of stuff, right? Okay, so you can see something there. But LDLC breaking that team came as a huge surprise to me. Huge surprise, because they all seem to be fitting in very well with the team as a whole, right? You know, like hanging out together. I mean, Kaylee Apex, they were at Asus ROG just a month before, and they're having a blast, a good time. Like I'm not as familiar with like Happy as the rest of them, but it's just like those guys really seem to get along well. And so you're thinking like, okay, you got yourself like a team that can really perform well in game, and they seem to be gelling well outside of the game as well. Like how do you fail with this? Like how do you not just consistently get better with this team and go for the long haul? And I think that was another thing as well, is that Apex at the beginning, you know, remember when there was so much discussion when Shoxy actually got taken out of Titan, and you know everybody's just calling for Uzi, basically just like get Uzi off that team, put Shoxy on that team turns into a superstar team. Basically that team is like going to be unstoppable, and then Apex steps up and he's like, no, we're actually not going to give up, we're not going to change anything. In fact, we're just going to keep Uzi because we feel like he's doing the job he needs to be doing, and we're comfortable with the lineup we have right now. And that's at that moment I was like, awesome. Apex is going for like a nip. Like he's just never gonna break this lineup. They're gonna do it. They're gonna go for the whole thing, right, together. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, it's just like, nope, 3 guys. You know, Existence is like, hey guys, you want to come play? And they're just like, sweet, yeah, let's do it. And you're just like, okay, so you busted your ass for 9 months to get a team to top 4, and then overnight you're just gonna shred all of that as if all that work never happened. I think that was a big surprise to a lot of us.
DDK, LDLC.
Right, so LDLC for me is a team that I've followed most closely actually out of these teams, because some people may be aware of it. I started making these like YouTube videos called like CSGO Pro Plays, and one of the early episodes I did was actually on LDLC way back in like February, March or something like that, like quite a long time ago. And I spotted like this one round from them. I wasn't actually looking at the demo for them either, but I spotted one round from them, and I was like, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, this round basically shows that this team, whether you credit the caller for this or whatever, but they had like this really intricate strategy. I think one of the best nuke upper takes I've seen, maybe the best one, but every single part of it was like layered correctly, so that like you could see in their approach to building that strategy that they thought at every single turning point, how can we lose from this position? How can we lose from this position? And they kept having answers for it. The more that I was looking at each stage of the strategy, so I was like, wow, this team, you know, I've got to actually really watch out for this team. And obviously, you know, they started doing better and better. And of course, you know, Happy was one of the people that was really, really key. Of course, he wasn't just their caller, but he was someone that would sit down and really flesh out all of these strategies. And really, you know, his team was so happy to like rehearse everything. And you can see that, because people talk about, you know, the crazy like individual skill players and stuff like that, but there is a lot to be said for actually being easy to lead at the same time, because that really allows someone who is a great tactician and strategist to actually make the most of his players if they are easier to lead as well. I mean, that's a whole nother argument. But LDLC basically, you saw them grow and mature, as Semmler said, into this amazing team. And I actually felt like at ESL Cologne that LDLC and Dignitas, to me, felt like the most complete teams at that point, from the sense that they had a really strong strategies. They had great individual skill, although I know you want to question Uzi all the time, which is fair enough. But they just seem to have it all. Whereas, you know, Nip were kind of shaky up and down but obviously they are tournament monsters, and they always know when to peak. And it felt like the reason that LDLC, the only reason that they didn't get further, and the only reason that Dignitas didn't get further, was purely psychological, just the tournament pressure, getting deep in the tournament. But LDLC to me looked like a top 2, top 3 team.
Okay, I mean, let me think where Semmler was on that first part there. Okay, so kind of talk about Semmler's talking about there, where they had this lineup and they wouldn't change it and they kept it together for so long. That's actually something that I really liked about LDLC, because what their team to me was like Cloud9, okay? Cloud9 clearly doesn't have tons of really good aimers. They're all in iBuyPower. They have like maybe one player who's like a star level player who's Hiko, but aside from them, you've got a lot of mid versatile players or role players. In general, you're not a lot of super skilled players here. But they managed to like wring the sponge for every last drop of what they can get out of that team. They put and crucially, here's the key point that kind of like you were kind of mentioning there, DDK. When you have players like that who actually acknowledge themselves, like, oh, I'm not supposed to be a star fragger who's going to go crazy this game. If they actually are intelligent players, they'll usually think, right, well, in that case, I need to just find a job I can do within this round or within this team that can work and do something okay. I might not be able to contribute 2 frags this round, but maybe I can throw a flash here, or I can follow this guy in better and cover his back. Simple things in CS, but when you actually have a team full of people like that, it actually allows you to be really, like, have like finesse on tactics. You don't just have like the timing of the tactic, or this guy has to get the kill as he goes in first. It's more like you have the finesse of like, everyone can do something quite complicated and fit it together. Whereas actually, if you have a team like a Hellraisers or Virtus Pro, you can't really go that super in depth, I don't think, because those players, it's not that sort of person. They're going to do things like, if part of how, I'll give this analogy because it's a great analogy. Someone like Virtus Pro or Hellraisers, part of what makes them scary is that at any point in a tactic, one of their players can be like in the moment and can aim really well, get one kill, and then just decide, right, I'm going to go over here and get the second one. Then I'm just going to break the round apart, but I'm going to totally destroy the opponents by doing this. And as a result, the opponent can't read that, and it's super hard to know what's going to happen. In a team like a Cloud9 or a LDLC, instead, that should never happen, okay? We planned this part, and then it goes to this part, and then this guy does this, and we all know the success is going to be like keeping the unit together and doing what we all agreed to do. And if we lose, okay, we can lose as long as we all did what we agreed, because then we can tweak that later and we can fix it. If we just break off and do crazy shit, there's nothing we can do there. You know, you can't recreate that scenario and it wouldn't happen next time. So it's kind of like, to me, LDLC is like the strength of what shot calling can do in a game. Like, yes, in an ideal world, we'd have all the aimers. Like, in an ideal world, you'd want actually Dignitas. You'd want all the aimers, and you'd want a tactician, and you'd want to make it work somehow, which I don't actually know that Dignitas does all the time, which is the problem with theirs. But if you were designing the perfect team, okay, because then the idea there is you'd have all the aimers as like as the tools in the toolbox that the tactician would use to win the round. But in reality, a lot of aimers, too many aimers, they can't really do those key roles. So if you go the other way, you can get all that perfect. But that's the point I'm going to come to secondly here. The thing I used to worry about LDLC is I thought like they were one of the teams where the ceiling was like really set for them. Like, I don't think they ever could have won a huge event. Like, I don't think they could have won ESL 1 Cologne. To me, they actually probably should have made the final. Like, yeah. I think both Cloud9 and LDLC would have won those series if Cobblestone didn't get drawn up, okay? If those maps weren't in it, I'm pretty sure they'd beaten it, both of them. So, okay, I'll give them the credit there. They go to the final of Cologne. But then I think they would have lost to Fnatic, okay? I think Fnatic had too much with the skill, and Fnatic has a good mid-range of some tactics and some freeform stuff. I think that's the problem I saw for LDLC. It's like, same with Cloud9, I love the team. I love, like, I know exactly your identity and what you're trying to do here, and I love how you're getting everything out of the players, but that's the problem. You're getting everything out of them. Like, eventually, I'll put it like this. Here's the simplest way to put why I think that a team like that can't win an event, including Cloud9. Is that they have to play like that and play perfectly and get everything, and they could get to a final or they could get to a semi, like both of those teams could at ESL Cologne. But their problem is, in every tournament, there's going to be 3 or 4 teams that are super skilled, like NiP, Dignitas, Fnatic, Virtus Pro, Na'Vi, who have super aimers. And if even one of those teams has a really strong tournament, then they'll probably beat you. Because on their best day, those teams, unfortunately, in CSGO tend to win those best of 3s over the old school Fnatic lineup, over the Cloud9 one, over the LDLC. Unfortunately, that sort of team has to win on consistency and make the other team, their level doesn't rise up. Whereas if you really do blast it through the roof, like someone like Virtus Pro can, I think you would beat an LDLC. So that's, to me, why I don't think it's necessary that they should never have considered a change. I think like the door was there, possibly. But like I say, I still love them as a team. And by the way, you don't have to be able to win the tournament to justify keeping your lineup together. You can do it just because it's awesome to get the most out of your players. Like to give a side analogy, because we're going to talk later about putting teams together. As a concept that I've always really loved, I do agree when you have like a Kenny S and you have the option to get him. If you can figure out a way to use him in your team, it's worth the gamble, okay? It's true, he's not going to be really good comms, and he's going to do his own thing, and he's going to take risks. But if you could make it work, I can see an upside to it, especially depending on what your options were. But if I'm in an ideal world, whenever I was playing in-game and I was making my teams, I would actually always choose the player who's not quite as skilled as the fragger, but he's not unpredictable like the fragger. I know exactly what I'll get out of him, and if I ask him do this job here, he always does it, okay, no matter what. Even if he dies and he doesn't get the kill, he always does the job as I've done. Like, I love that as an in-game leader, because I know all the variables and I know all the moving parts there. So when we lose, I either know, like, we really did give it our best chance for what we've got as our skills, or I know, like, okay, fair enough, we lost, but, like, since you did what I said here, maybe it was my bad. Like, I put you in the wrong position. Actually, if I'd have read the game properly, I would have told you, stop doing that, that's not working. Like, as a result, I have more factors I can play with myself here, you know. It's not like in the Kenny S scenario, sometimes Titan could lose a game, and I'm not even sure if your existence you could sit down and go, that was the wrong approach, because on the other 4 times we tried that, maybe Kenny S killed the guy there and you got in the sight, you know, like, you can't really, you can't, to take away the weakness there is to take away the strength, you know what I mean? Does anyone have anything to jump in on this point?
I feel like Pronax is probably the guy that makes the star players work in the team the best, just because of his ability to actually call is very, very compatible with people who are loose cannons, because he's able to just snap react on a round to just make it work. Like, he can deviate so effectively and so quickly because he can read the game so incredibly well also. I feel like Pronax is one of those kind of callers, and you'd have to, like, calling is just so incredibly difficult. You can pretty much make anything work, as you said, as long as you understand all the variables, because at the end of the day, it is just about having a bunch of variables and having the ranges and understanding what the ranges mean and understanding value and so on and so forth, and just making the best, like, value plays, like, over a long period of time. That's how you get consistency in anything. So that is a very interesting point. That's pretty much all I would really say about that. I think that the whole, like, calling thing is incredibly difficult, and not many people have really figured it out.
Well, that's why if you ever hear interviews with in-game leaders, the in-game leader is usually the guy who will never say, like, oh, we couldn't have won that game. Because the whole point is, within the game, both in-game leaders see the scenarios of, like, right, I know what he's trying to do, and, like, if I could just maybe try this, will that shut it down? No, that didn't work. Right, try something else, do this. And then on the other side, they're like, okay, I think there's a weakness here. If we attack it in this way, it might work. Did that work? No. All they're doing is looking, what are the options here? And then trying to pick the best one each time, okay? And obviously, there's the mind game of, like, trying to think what the opponent will do. But as a result, I feel like every in-game leader, there's a famous quote, okay, you'll like this, DDK, from the 1v1 duel player in Quake 3 called CZM, this American guy. And he had a famous quote which sounds really arrogant, and it says that I've never had a game where the opponent didn't give me a chance to win. That sounds like, wow, how arrogant. You played some of the best players ever, like they were in peak form. But I totally get what he means. He doesn't mean, by the way, that he could have won every game. He just means every time I saw, like, 1 or 2 things that, like I knew what the answer to beating was, but maybe I couldn't do it okay. Maybe I figured out that, but then I went for it and that wasn't the right strategy. Or maybe I tried this thinking it was, and I realized halfway through, like, oh, it's not, but I've blown my chance now. Like, I think every in-game leader thinks that way, you know. They can actually all see what the variables are like that. It's just that it doesn't play out that way every game. So that's why you've got to have that mentality, though.
It's also actually a really interesting point, because the way, like, when we were talking previously about star players and stuff like that, the way that most star players become star players, or maybe become people who constantly take, like, minus EV plays, is because they are people who are naturally gifted. But it's like a confirmation bias thing. They can do it because they have the skill and it works. Doesn't mean it's the best play, but it keeps working for them. So it's kind of like keeps validating, like, their actions. And it's kind of this psychological concept as well, that we selectively remember, like, the things that go terribly wrong, and we don't remember the things that go well. Like, we have all these, like, weird ways of processing information. And when it comes to...
All the way around, you mean? The things that go very, very right and don't remember the ones that go wrong?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
it depends on your mood. Yeah. Like, if you can take, like, bad beats in poker, or like
an ace or something like that. Two extremes, basically, not the general bit in the middle of the graph.
But it is weird, though, because it is like extremes, because there are lots of situations where you're like, but I know that I've done this before and it has worked. So even though it's, like, a terrible play to make, like, that peak is terrible, you should never peak there. But it's like, but I've done it before and I have made the super awesome clutch and got all the glory. So, there's lots of weird situations like that. But I think people, like going back to your point, a lot of people don't actually look at it in that way, because, like you said, if you go to every single demo of a game that you lost, and even the games that you won, like, games that you won aren't necessarily you playing well. you know, maybe the opponents play badly, maybe the strategy isn't necessarily the best in the world, maybe it's not actually working even though you're winning. So there's always something to go back and look at and actually figure out. And I feel like I feel like that's something that's not done enough, but I feel like there'll be, with the new like Face It format, I think that's actually encouraging towards that kind of thinking for teams, because they'll be forced to try to get edges by actually looking back at their own games and also looking at other teams to find out what that thing was that they could have done. Because yeah, it's also very lazy. To add another point here, as like a player's perspective, it is this like very lazy thing in anything where you play the game and you have this like initial emotional response. You're like, oh, you know, shit, we lost the game. That sucks. And it's because of this bad thing that I remembered. Like we talked there, you know, like that one bad beat. Oh, there's one bad thing. That's the reason we lost. Actually, it could be like something systematic, like that's really, really bad that caused the loss of the game. But you're kind of like, well, I already know the reason I lost. I need to go back and look at the demos. It's like kind of this laziness thing. That's really common as well. I feel like there's a lot of unexplored territory with all this entire approach to how to look at the game.
We have a lot of. You should have teams actually looking for ticks, and it's something, you know. The more you talk with the teams, and the more they start figuring out that actually they start to fall into a rhythm. They start to fall into, oh, you throw this flash at this time before going into this room, but you do it every round. And as soon as you start becoming predictable like that, it's a matter of looking. But the only way you're going to catch that sometimes is by either getting told it by somebody who's watched a lot of your games, or going back and watching that demo and being thorough with, you know, having to go through step by step. That's just a small point. I'd like to close with one quote that was actually pretty funny, and I think is actually.
What do you mean you like to close? The show's an over, Semmler.
No, it's not closed. I'll close this line of discussion though, so we can move on. But you didn't win because you're not stupid. You won because the other guy is stupider than you. You're still pretty stupid. And this is by Tecumseh. But that's the thing. A lot of these things come down to the other team actually made a mistake at that point that allowed you to benefit from it, or you were in the position to be able to benefit from that mistake. And that's a lot of CS, because if everybody plays perfectly, then when do you actually manage to get anything done? It's when somebody actually makes a mistake that Taz gets a 1v3 versus Titan on Inferno, or, you know, any other number of clutches. Basically, everybody peaks one after the other versus Candy S for some reason on Inferno versus Fnatic this last week. You know, that sort of stuff, right? So there you go. It's basically like put the emphasis on the mistakes more than anything.
I think I have a good point to tie into these 2 points you brought up here, which is that, okay, here's a little story for you. I won't give any juicy details because there aren't any juicy details. The story doesn't go anywhere, it just begins, and that's the idea that's cool, okay? There was once a famous CS team who were talking to me, like, wanted me to, like, do analysis for them or be, like, a manager or something, and the idea was, like, it would be, like, a tactical role I'd be playing because they weren't the most tactical team. And so when I was talking to this team, I was actually telling them that since they had, like, really good skills and a very defined style of play, like, even though you're admitting, like, you're not that tactically good, that's why you want some help, and we're not going to make you into like MTW in 1.6. We're not going to make you into Titan now, because that actually would go totally against your strengths, okay? Instead, what we're going to do is we're not going to focus on your stuff. We're not going to make your T rounds different. We're going to focus on what the enemy does on their CT sides, right? And so I developed a system, a line of thinking. I won't go into the DLC because it would be like boring and give shit away. But basically, my core concept I wanted them to get through their heads wasn't like, watch a demo and look on this round, he's like in this position here. Because that sort of stuff, okay, can be changed very easily. If the enemy picks up that you're doing it, then that's what he'll change. That's the first thing he'll change. My core principle I wanted them to get to was, you're going to have your T rounds anyway, and all you're going to do with the information I give you is pick the best T round. And the key thing we're going to look at when we look at demos isn't what the enemy does on these rounds and how it affects it. It's what is the enemy's natural tendency here. Like, if something happens to him, what does he react? How does he react naturally? Not like within the tactic, like he always comes to here, but as in, like, if you throw a flash to his right here, does he always go to his left and hide behind this box because that's where he gets more kills and he doesn't get killed that way? If so, we're going to design our tactics or pick the tactic that makes him go into his tendency position, which is the worst for him, okay? That's the one that actually doesn't work out that often. And so the idea is, what we're going to fuck with them here is, even if they adapt and change what they do, we've got our tactic that works for us anyway, but we're picking the one that bullies them. And I actually took this concept from tennis, which is, in tennis, the best player ever is Roger Federer. And this guy, what makes him amazing is he has every shot in the book. He can hit every sort of shot at every range, and he's incredible at it. But when he played against Nadal, his big rival, Nadal's strength, okay, isn't that he can make every shot. He's a pretty good shot maker, but he crucially is left-handed, and so he could hit this specific type of top spin shot, okay, that went to the one shot in Federer's arsenal that wasn't quite amazing as all the rest. It was still very good, but it wasn't quite as amazing as his forehand, okay, which was if you hit a high backhand, he couldn't really reach up as well, and he couldn't return it quite. He could return it. The whole point is he wouldn't return it. Like if he returned with a forehand, that's his primary shot. He'd hit like a winner with that. He'd hit it like in a spot you couldn't get to. So all Nadal did, this is real. You can go watch these games if you're a tactician, this sort of thinker. Just watch where he places the ball every time, and all he does is pound the ball into that one spot over and over, trying to get high backhand. That's all he's making in return. And listen, Federer sometimes still beat him with that. He was that good, okay. But it actually, as a result, that's part of why Nadal, and listen, not everyone can do this. That's a key point. It's not like everyone could watch this and do it. But the key point is, because he could do it, he'd found the one way to make Federer at his weakest of what he could be weak, because he's the best player, okay? And it worked. So that was the similar concept I was trying to give them, okay? That like people, that's an area that I don't think people ever think tactically. They usually think specifically, like, right, we watched these last 3 demos they did, and they always do this strat, okay? They do this rotation, and that's what they focus in on. And I mean, we'll probably talk about this later, but that's where you've seen teams fall up. Like when Complexity tried to anti-strat Fnatic at DreamHack Winter, they were doing that approach. Well, the problem with that approach is then if the other team changes that strat, now you're fucked. Whereas if they did an approach I'm talking about, even within what they did change, they'd still have some of these tendencies, okay? You'd have a sense of what you could get out of a weakness. Sounds like you want to say something, DDK?
Yeah, I have a good example of this as well, to kind of put a nice finish to your point. Actually, the standard round, to like give an example to people of this concept, the standard round of like Dust 2, and this is like a very common principle across all maps in CS, of course, is like there's like two like types of control usually, or the way that I'm thinking about it, the game right now. If the control on the information, obviously like pressure on information, and also pressure and awareness of economy, because those are the two things that like create decision making for both teams. So to go to this point, like that Thorin is discussing, if you do the standard round on Dust 2, where you're able to like you send like a couple 2 or 3 people in dark, so you have like dark, you get them to smoke the Xbox and the double doors, so that there's no vision at all for the CTs in mid, and you actually take short slowly, like you flash guy in short, you take short, and you have like a guy outside long. You basically have like the most information possible, and this is a really good example because of what Thorin's talking about, because basically there's lots of things that you can do from this perspective that have a lot of potential reactions that make the call whether to A split or B split very obvious. Because for example, like if you have like a lot of threat on long, and there's like, let's say 1 or 2 players on long, and you know that you can hear that, you've got in short, he can hear that, then what tends to happen is a B split becomes like a super awesome option, because the guys on long are so far away from B, you're already like on top of the site and planting before the rotation has barely even begun. And like there's like very simple decision making that comes off of like these basic strategies, and it's just by making certain moves and then confirming what player is actually the best after you realize that they actually took the reaction that you intended by using certain smokes or flashes or faking of certain positions. And that's like, to someone who just gets into CS, this is like how CS at the top level should work, and does work in a lot of the top matches, not always, but this is how it does tend to work.
That's the thing, it's not always like that. This is like we used to come from an era where it all worked like clockwork, right? Where it all was very, very. This is like Titan's way of approaching the game, basically existence. You know, like his way is very structured. You know, if we are putting pressure on long, then defense should be weaker on B, right? That's the line that you draw there, right? You're gonna have one guy defending on B slope, one guy on site. Maybe that guy is playing greedy and getting in window. You know, and we should be able to take advantage of that, right? But what it comes down to now is actual individual smarts over the team smarts or the leader smarts, because you're actually having to go off of the information that the teammates themselves are seeing more so than anything. Like now it's really just it's not so much anymore just, you know, hey, we're gonna have these really static responses to everything. It's actually kind of everybody kind of bleeding out across the map and doing their own thing, and then getting a pick, and then after that just making the call as to what you're going to do. But it's a very split second thing, and it's got to come from somebody who knows, oh right, okay, I can push this. And that was Thorin's example right there with VP. What they're so good about is Snax or Bialy can get that initial pick, but then decide to speed up immediately behind it and get even more of an advantage off of that, because they see that opening. And Snax is so dirty, he's so good at seeing that too. Like he does dirty plays all the time where he gets behind the enemy lines and all sorts of stuff like that, where it's only Snax that's really doing this, and that's how smart this player is. But like to know when you should be going forward and when you should be trying to push for the advantage rather than backing off. So if you look at the difference between what made Titan successful and what made VP successful, VP has players like Bialy, like Snacks, somewhat, you know, Neo and Taz, but they aren't in that position at all. It's not their job to do that. It's really just like Snacks, Bialy, and somewhat Pasha. Like, those guys know when to push forward, and they have the freedom from that team to push forward. I think that's the more important thing. They have that freedom. Titan tried to do that a little bit, but their style revolves more around Kenny and less around the other guys, it felt like. And Kenny with an op, that's not a weapon that you can use to push aggressively and get in their face and try and crack things open like that. It's never going to work. But at the root of it is that Existence doesn't want that. He doesn't want you to immediately speed up off of things. He wants to, you know, slow it down, try and be cerebral, and try and think things out, when really it should be a visceral reaction. It should be instantly having that whatever it is that tilts in you to know, okay, this is the time to go forward, like a Hiko, basically. Like, you know, Hiko is like the master of this, just knowing when to go and how best to take advantage of a situation rather than backing off and trying to play it smart. He goes by the guttural instinct of, or the gut instinct of, I'm just going to go in there and actually flank these two guys who have no idea, because they're never going to expect me coming that way, or a Snacks through the smokes, stuff like that. Like, I think we're drifting a lot more towards the individual smart play versus the mastermind puppeteer, basically.
There's one more point about it that I do want to make, though, because there's this problem, and this is the same in Quake as well, top level Quake, that if you have, let's say, because this is about like creating something where you have the information, but you need to confirm it. And that's like this really, really big deal in Quake, that there are a lot of spots where you need to try to confirm it before you make the play that you think could be optimal, because if you get it wrong, you can lose the game. And in CS, I think there are lots of spots for the terrorists where that's actually possible, because if you have a player like, let's say, that's really as good on the flank as someone like by themselves, like Flasher or Get Right or whoever, like you're actually able as a terrorist side to actually sack players to confirm information, to like make certain calls. And if you have a player that's as good as those, they might even get the frags. And then if you have like a caller like Pronax, he's able to turn it into a really like sick round. But that's like this, like using that example again, if you do have like the guy trying to peek or long to see the positions or numbers, then that can inform you. So like I think that's the hardest thing, is like confirming information, and that's what some teams are really, really good at, like denying that info, and that's a whole nother ball game.
It's a totally different. That's the thing. It's like going off of how static the defense is, and are they actually shifting up their defense round after round? Because then you do have teams like VP or Dignitas who are actually really good at this. Is like round after round after round how they're actually holding, which makes it a nightmare to deal with, because you go off of information. You're like, yeah, okay, 2 rounds ago he held like this, and then the guy's like totally, on another place right now, and you get just busted open. Sorry, Thorin.
The thing is, I mean, conceptually, in terms of like how leading teams could go, there's like 3 levels you can come to. You can have one where you have an in-game leader, because that's actually a weird thing about CS, okay? Maybe people who don't follow other games won't know this, but in other games, like in League of Legends, for example, almost no teams have only one shot caller. It's actually quite rare in that game. Whereas what's funny is, the reason why they don't have it is going to be what I'm going to get to now, but actually in CS, by default, we all only have one in-game leader. I mean, we don't in some teams, they've made exceptions, but that's the general rule, okay? Every team, by default, picks an in-game leader. And so the problem we have in CS is that in general, it's good to at least have someone do it, as opposed to everyone do what they want completely, just freeform completely. But the problem in CS is we only have a handful of like genius guys at that role. We have a bunch of people who are doing it, like Shocks and Epsilon, where he's doing it just because, well, we haven't got an in-game leader, so someone's going to have to do it, therefore I'll do it, therefore I'll try and learn it, but I'm never going to be Existence, like I'm not going to be at that level. So here's the thing. You go from that level, which is like, you don't want just 5 people just doing anything who don't have any concept of what to do. The next level up, the next level of progression is you have one shot caller, but he's really good. And now the idea here is, okay, separately, maybe our 5 players aren't very tactically gifted, and so if they all just made their own decisions, it'd be chaos. There wouldn't be anything connecting them. So what we do with the second level up is we have an in-game leader, and the idea is, because he's going to make most of the decisions, and we know he's a smart guy, in general, sure, he won't have perfect information because he's not all the players. At least he'll make better decisions with what he has, okay? He'll get the most out of the info you give him. And so in theory, that's the next level up, and that's one of the most successful styles. Is the Dignitas is the Titan style, where you give him all the information, and he just tries to be the genius and make the right call here and here, even if he's not there.
I don't think Dignitas has been like that anymore, though, dude. For a long time, I don't think Dignitas has played like that.
Okay, but that's the stereotype.
Like the tier 3.
Okay, so that's the stereotype.
They're definitely part of the tier 3, which is where we are now with these top teams, and which is why I think Mercenaries, or now LDLC, are top tier material, is because now the way that it actually happens is you have the in-game leader, But really, you have everybody on that team with so much experience that they can all kind of do what they want. So long as the communication is good and they all have an overview of what's happening on the map, they all kind of just do what they want, really. And then some guy may be like, okay, guys, you know, let's go and focus on B maybe this round with like 3 guys, right? You know, and we'll see how it goes. And then everybody kind of just goes off and does their thing, and then they've just worked together so long and they're so good at communication with each other that it just works. Like they'll take that B split and make it work, or they fall back to a set strat, obviously. But like I feel like most of the round actually revolves around 4 guys that are just really, really smart at the game, knowing where to go and knowing what to do, and then they kind of come back together again for an execute, or they just speed up off of something that they've managed to figure out early on in the round.
So conceptually, that's level 3. Okay, level 3 is the idea that instead of the 1 general, you have 5 generals, and the idea is each person to some degree has his own autonomy, that he can make his own mini decision.
I'm thinking you have 2 to 4 generals basically, and that depends a lot on the team. But you have 2 to 4 generals. You have 2 shot callers at least on most of these teams now, with like 3, or they all kind of weigh in, or you know, like, oh yeah, I think, you know, basically it's somebody like, oh, I just spotted this. This is kind of what might be happening now, and they'll like weigh in that way. But I think it's more like the top teams that we know of right now. It's like it's 2 guys that are giving a lot of input, maybe mid-round calls, beginning, or they'll split it up, right? Or they'll have like the strat set up beforehand, and then they'll have a guy call like, okay, maybe we'll go for this, right? And then they'll have the mid-round caller, and then maybe they come back to the first leader to do like the wrap up, right? But like everybody kind of kicks in at a different time throughout the round. And I feel like a lot of teams are starting to do this now. They just have so much experience now on these teams. These players have so much experience now that everybody's kind of figured out, okay, I'm really good actually at mid-round calls, and he's really good at beginning and end round calls. Let's just you know, go together like that, and we each fill our role. And then the other 3 guys are smart too, so we kind of expect them to do their thing. But you know, in the end, we're all going to go at once. Like that I feel like is the way forward right now, or at least the way that a lot of these teams are playing.
I think it's like a really interesting point because to me, I'm always very dubious about this because from my experience of playing a lot and stuff as well, there's like so much value into having people not necessarily like having the guy who makes the call that's the committed call. No one questions it. Everyone instantly reacts to it. Because if there's ever anything that's up for debate, then in a game like CS, one of the reasons why I think someone like Pronax is so good at the freeform Simon calling is because so many decisions are like so like it's almost it's a game of seconds and like the smallest of edges, and like you need to make calls like straight away, like because there can be those situations where you go for the double back or you go for the flank or you go for the hold or whatever it is, and every single second does count in those spots. And that's what makes these guys so good, is because they can know that through their gut instead of having to think consciously about it,
or have somebody tell them to do that. I think that's the big thing, is that Pronax, you know, he's got Olofmeister, he's got Krims, and he's got Flusha, and he's got JW. But JW is definitely more of a player who kind of just does his thing. Like he has got the full freedom on Fnatic. He just kind of runs around and does his thing. And then you have the 4 other guys who kind of play. It's like the Kenny S Titan sort of thing, right? That Thorin mentioned earlier on in the show, where it's just like you have the one guy. He has the freedom to go and do whatever he wants, and then the 4 of us are kind of going to lock things down while he goes and gets info or a frag or something, right? That's a lot of what Fnatic does now, except that Pronax, in his genius, he's actually figured out that Krims is just a brilliant top fragger, basically. Like, this guy's a beast, and he can walk in anywhere and get frags. You know, kind of talking just briefly on Fnatic, Olofmeister really worries me. It feels like he's the guy who's still actually trying to look for how he fits into that team. Because I think JW actually takes the role that Olofmeister had beforehand, and JW is still holding on to that role, whereas Olofmeister is the guy who's so goddamn good, he's still actually able to look good in the position that he is, but he's still in this kind of free-floating position, I feel like, with Fnatic right now. He doesn't really fit like the rest of them do.
Okay, save your thoughts on Fnatic. I'll put that at the end. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that later.
That's another good one to talk about, because there's still a new lineup. Okay, so to kind of tie this together, I've got a way to tie the 2 points you just made about the in-game leadership to what I was saying about other games, actually, which goes like this. It's true that the 3rd level, conceptually, in an ideal world, you'd have the multiple generals approach. Because the key thing about that is, the idea is, each person who's in the game has more information than the leader himself, okay? It's actually, there's a famous saying in Korean, actually, that no one is as smart as all of us. And so what they're trying to promote there is that everyone should have their input into something, okay? Like, everyone should be able to say, I think this, and you think that. And the idea is the collective of what we all think is going to be better than what even the genius amongst us will think, okay? Because even an idiot could contribute something that Dota added on to what the genius says. Now, the problem with that is, though, that's only conceptually the best level. If you put a lot of teams at that level who don't have really good nous about the game and not really good smarts, actually, that'll ruin them. That'll make them quite inefficient. And actually, those sorts of teams would benefit from the one leader. If they had one genius, it'd be better that the one genius makes a decision with incorrect information than though I'll say the idiot, but the guy who's not as tactically sound makes the decision okay. Now, the reason this is a key point is because that is one of the reasons why I think that NiP and Virtus Pro are the two best teams overall. Because first of all, whenever anyone's always said, here's what's funny, in the early days of CSGO when NiP was dominating, everyone I'm not even joking for everyone watching now who thinks this is going to sound like a ridiculous opinion. People used to say the reason they dominated is because they had 4 of the best top players. People used to say they had 4 of the 5 best players in the world, which if you've seen CSGO now is ridiculous. Like, I'm sorry, at no point in time was like Dosia worse than Exist. At no point in time was like Nico worse than Freeburg. I think the worst star players on other teams who just skill-wise were better than some of the other players for NiP, okay? The real thing, if you look through the history of CSGO, that NiP is better than everyone else at, is they have the best communication in all of CSGO. Like, when I watch them play, they're the team where they know exactly what information to give to the other guy, that he then knows how to play off it. And yeah, they have an advantage. Exactly. They've had the same lineup forever, and it works as well, so they don't have to change it. So they have this little advantage, but to me, that's their strength. So when DDK was describing here, the Virtus Pro, it's a similar thing for them. They kind of found a good lineup that could do that, but I actually see that they both use that similar concept. The idea that the individual makes part of the decision. They use that in a different way. Like, Virtus Pro use it like this. They get a little edge, like a guy makes a play here, and then everyone else just collapses and like strangles you dead right then. You're just dead immediately, and you're like, what the fuck? We can't do anything. NiP, it's more like they make one little good decision, then you keep playing. They make another good decision, they keep playing. They just grind you up by making more good decisions than you do across the game, and somehow that means they retake the site, that means they get into the site, that means they get the bomb down, they get the 1v2. They just, like, these are two different spectrums of having the super generals. But the key thing is, they're 2 of the only teams I know in CSGO where they can really do that approach. Like, other teams try it.
But that's why it's the tier 3. That's
why it's the best approach.
It's the ultimate thing, is because only the best can actually do it, because they get 3, 4, 5 players who have the experience to actually make that work. And I think you hit the most important point right there, Thorin. It was the fact that NiP communication is sacrosanct. Communication is all important when it comes to this, because they give the information, and then that player is smart enough and experienced enough to know exactly what he has to do in that position. And then he's played for a year and a half with this other guy behind him, backing him, to know exactly what he's going to do in that situation. And then NiP become this hive mind. Like, that's the crazy thing about NiP. And VP is kind of the same thing. Like, we were having this discussion as to whether Bialy and Snax are just genius, or if somehow, and this is like a 2-hour discussion that we had, but like to cut it short, basically. The foundation, was it able, what was, basically, how did this work? Okay, VP, basically, think about them as a tree, right? And Snax and Bialy are a tree. Were Neo, Pasa, and Taz able to be just such rich and fertile soil that they were able to grow that tree in the space of 10 weeks, what it should have taken 100 years to grow, right? Okay, with Snax and Bialy. If that makes any sense at all.
Well, no, the key thing with them is, like, that's why I described it as they just found the magical lineup. It's like what the chemistry you normally have to build, they just somehow had, like, boom, there you go, we got it already. Which is like, right, that's like cheating usually. That doesn't really happen normally.
Understand it. A lot of players don't understand it. They're just like, how in the fuck are Snax and Bialy so good? They just don't understand how they got that good so fast. And this is actually, like, you have players, they're just like, that genius, that prodigy, that word kind of comes up in their case, because you just don't realize that the leaps and bounds these guys have taken in experience over their very short career at the top. Like, they haven't been around for ages like the rest of these guys, like fucking Taz and Neo, these guys who have been competing for a fucking decade. Like, they don't have that. So how did they get so good so quick? It really is the magical lineup in VP's case. Like,
think about it this way. Like I said, to me, NiP and Virtus Pro overall are the best teams at the moment. Well, they're both the teams we described as at the tier 3 level. Well, you can even look at the teams, and these are 2 teams who don't have the genius strat caller. Like, I'm sorry to anyone who thinks that, oh wow, if he won all those tournaments, he must be the genius. You remember when Fiflaren took over as the in-game leader? Yeah, NiP changed their style a little bit, but overall it was the same NiP. They were actually almost just as good. They were still could have won big events. They actually, not that much changed really. If anything, the only thing that changed when Fiflaren took over from Exist is the play of Fiflaren and Exist. They actually both sort of, like, one became better, one became worse. Actually, I don't think the team of NiP was that drastically different. They still did this same approach. Even more so Virtus Pro. Dude, Virtus Pro has literally had everyone in the team now be the in-game leader. And they're still just the same style of team, you know?
So like I have a couple of thoughts on so on this like the tier 3, there's like actually like a cheat to achieve that, and so I can use an example from Quake World and then use a 1.6 example. So in Quake World, the way that it works is that there's this, to play a map, there is an optimal strategy to play a map, and the way that it works is that you have four like information, and then like handing out information, as you know, Thorin in Quake World is incredibly hard and important, like insanely important. And the thing is that everyone knows this optimal strategy so well that every single player knows exactly what information is most critical at which point, which signals to every other player based on what they're doing and what they know of their team from information, what exactly they should be doing, because everyone already knows what is optimal.
Basically at trigger points.
Exactly, and in 1.6, when I was like talking to Threat a lot about this kind of stuff, and like he had his team of Lowland Lions, and they were getting like really sick, like really good, probably like a top 3 team at one point, and he was saying that the way that they used to do it, and they had this system, and I actually think this is really smart, and it like plays off that Quake World example. They had a system based on that they had rules, like that everyone would play by rules. So if there was like a certain situation that would happen, then their reaction would be this, and like everyone would already know that without even a call. And it could be something that's very tactical and simple, or it could be something that's built into some strategy that they run. And this is based upon like demos that they go over previously. So they have like the trigger points basically, which allows every single player without the call to understand what is the most optimal thing to do based on the strategy and what they've seen. And if they only, and like they have like little, and something that they could also build into this is that you can create an opportunity off of a strategy for like a certain trigger. So you go for a peek, you see one guy. If see guy, then that triggers something else, and I give this information to my team, and they know what to do here. If I don't see guy, then this triggers something else. So they had this system in place, and I think that's a way to actually cheat to that.
Well, that's also. I mean, there's no, but that's the thing. That is all just standard. That's just standard stuff that teams have to do. Like for them to function and to get that team play to that level, that's kind of like they have that checklist, that internal checklist. Like, okay, Chili's picking mid at this point, so I should be here, and like they can kind of know where they're supposed to be. The real scary part is the experience that comes over 10 years of playing the game that allows you to refine that and push it even further and to be able to know. And it turns into the real mind game of, okay, we all know this skeleton because we've all played together and we've all competed against each other for X amount of years and yada yada. We all know this skeleton. Now it's about how do we actually find that next step past the skeleton? And you have these guys who have just a decade of experience versus these guys who have maybe several years worth of experience, and yet they are now able to come up and actually compete versus these guys with 10 years of experience. So how is that? Like, that's the Snacks and Bialy question. That's like, how are they able to jump that gap and bring it so that they're able to be
but that's the thing, Semmler. When you say like it's standard, like everyone should have it. In a world like, let's imagine CS was like professional sports, and you had like all these coaches and analysts and a training system, and you brought people up for the youth system. This is what it would be like. Okay, you'd be taught this way of thinking. But actually what's sad is in pro CS there are top teams. I mean, I always use the joke Hellraisers, because this is a team who doesn't understand certain concepts. They can win the game, and they can play within their skill set, but there are certain concepts they don't understand which would like revolutionize their play if they did. Like, something about them doesn't click with these, they don't agree with it, or they've never went down that line of thought, and they don't exhibit it in their game, you know. And even a layman, I'm not really a layman, but you know what I mean, even someone who isn't a pro player could actually identify it in a way that they couldn't, even though they're much better.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're right. And I don't know if it's like just the fact that they can't seem to gel as a team or something. I guess I should have expanded on it's the standard to just being like it's standard across the top.
No, it should. Conceptually, this is the standard how it should be done. I agree.
It should be regardless. And the top teams, they have gone through this where they'll always kind of like mention it. If you can interrogate them long enough, they'll start mentioning that they have these core tenets to how they approach the game as a team, etc. And then they'll just cut it off there because they're not going to tell you exactly what makes their team tick, right? Obviously, okay. But they have these sorts of things, and they all have it. But just like for example, there was that's the thing. You can't. Going into it though, you're right. I mean, if everybody had the budget, if everybody had the time, if everybody had everything, the coaches, etc., you would think that perhaps it's going to happen. In the case of Hellraisers, I have no idea. Like, there really is no idea why that team.
No,
can't
they're just a mystery. They're like the team.
They're a total mystery.
Their problem, what's funny is I figured out, I think, what their problem is. Their problem is their biggest strength, which is all these sick aimers. And so what happens is, if they'd have done a Fnatic and they'd have had these like 5 events where they progressively placed lower, they would eventually make a change and they would eventually think, right, something about the approach doesn't work. But they have such sick aimers that when they have that half a tournament, or they have like 1 tournament in a row where everyone goes nuts, it confirms to them that the system works still. And they're like, right, if we can just do that again, that'll work out. And it's like, guys, that was the 1 out of 5 thing that isn't going to happen again. So like, the one thing you can confirm is that should have shown you that won't happen, because that was like everything going perfectly, you know. So I think that's what holds them back. They haven't fully ever. It's like they're like the alcoholic who never hits rock bottom. Okay, he has enough money and he has a girlfriend who doesn't mind it that much, and he takes a weekend off to sober up a bit, but he keeps going back to the alcoholism, you know. So he's never hit full rock bottom. Yeah, it's a great, nice image there. Dosia, just
nice
like
about it, right? Yeah, no.
I am Dosia. I'm an Aimers Anonymous. I have never thought about the game. Yesterday I was in AIM for 7 hours. I didn't listen to the strategies. I thought, no, anyway. Right. Now that we've had that general discussion, we'll actually go what we originally set out to do, which was, we were talking before about the teams as they were before. And so in talking about them, we had a discussion basically of how each team was set up, the philosophy, how they're led. So now we're going to talk about these 3 new French lineups. So the first one we'll go to is the same order. We'll start with Titan. So I may as well say this bit again. So Titan, their current lineup is they've retained Existence and Kenny S. And then they added in Kaylee, Happy, and Maniac. No, Apex and
Apex
Happy.
and Maniac.
Yeah.
Apex and Maniac.
Right, yeah. Apex, Kaylee, Maniac. They're the 3 that they added from LDLC. So what do you think of the new Titan, Semmler?
I think it's much the same as the old Titan, and I actually think it's a bit weirder. And okay, I'll walk you through this, because like what I had originally thought, like when I first saw that lineup, the only thing I thought was, oh, this is mouse sports, because it's a double op sort of style. It's Alu and Chris J, except that they have Existence who's calling the shots on that team, and in order to make that kind of play work, basically it relies on both of your operas being batshit crazy and able to get into these ridiculous positions and actually pull it off. But to do that, you have to have the freedom from your leader and from your team to be able to go and hunt for those positions and really just get in your opponent's face. And Existence is never going to allow that. He's way too much of a perfectionist when it comes to leading, controlling his team, and how he sees the game should be played. So it's going to be really interesting to see actually how they manage to make it work, because when you glance at that lineup and you're like, okay, it's still Kenny, they're still going to revolve around Kenny, and we've already seen this originally in like what they've shown us just in these first few games, that they're still revolving around Kenny. And that's basically Kaylee is, you know, they're having to change roles on the map. So like, okay, that makes sense, right? You change it up. Okay, you're gonna have to change roles sometimes, but that's already affected Apex's play, for example. And Kaylee is not picking up the op as often. But I don't like the fact that either they're going to have to commit to a double op play, or it's going to be like Kenny or Kaylee or whatever. Like, I don't like having like roles where people just actually have to, like, you know, they just kind of swap it around and whatever. Like, nobody can really excel the way that we should be able to see it from LDLC. I just feel like Titan is kind of like they're just doing it all over again. It's like what we had at the beginning of the year. You can already kind of see what's in their heads when they're going to go forward. Is like, we're going to work really hard, get to a point where we can actually do some damage, but then everybody's going to figure us out, and then we're just going to kind of like struggle from there.
So Semmler, before we all get into our thoughts on Titan, I have a question I forgot to ask, which is that it has never been officially stated how these moves went down. But let me give you a hypothetical. I'm assuming you either know or you can make a guess. So I would assume, based on the positioning of all the teams, that since LDLC was doing the best, and in theory their best players left, that means that LDLC's players left and they were going to go to Titan, and the Titan kicked the players. Is that accurate? Or was it... Because other people will think, oh, well, MBK's great, Scream's great, so maybe they left Titan.
We have that information from Dorian Costanzo at Vacarme. He released this...
it wasn't in English.
It wasn't in English, it was in French. But he released that first article that actually got all this going, right?
Was it something like that?
Lineups, and it was something like that, where Apex and Maniac were going to go over to Titan. And basically Titan, I believe, we're going to get rid of Smiths and Scream.
And NBK decided to leave to Epsilon?
And NBK decided to go as well. And
right,
then
that makes sense. Yeah.
Kaylee was brought in to fill in NBK's role, and that's how it all kind of came. Yeah. So basically they weren't going to go with the double up in the beginning, but now it is like an option that they have. but I still feel like Kenny and Kaylee are two. Like Kaylee is very good. He's kind of like a Guardian where he can play really well with the rifle. We've seen that, but he's still like his go-to weapon. Like if he can buy an AWP, he would want to buy an AWP. He wouldn't want to buy an AK. But in Titan, they're clearly giving the role to Kenny.
Because that's the key thing I wanted to point out here, because as we later on talk about who got the better end of the deal and which team's going to be better, the problem is I get the sense from the public's point of view, because they think of NBK. NBK has always been like a famous player, and crucially, Scream's a highlight player. So they're thinking to themselves, well, there's no way these players would be kicked, you know, because they're like the public way thinking. We all know they think you kick the worst player and the least skilled player. So they're going to think that this move was spurred by NBK leaving. Like I actually saw people saying stuff like, he's a traitor and all this. But actually, with the way the teams were set up, I was like, there's no way that can be the way it is. Like Titan's looking for players. LDLC maybe want to upgrade and change organization. Like I could see that was the way it was probably going to be. So
no, nobody knows what really happened. Like,
no, but I think that's a more reasonable explanation, you know.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there's been like word around the campfire, right? That it was like Apex and Maniac who left first and stuff like that. But like nobody really knows what actually happened behind the scenes.
No, but I mean, when we come to now judge Titan, as we will in a minute, it'd be one thing to judge them if they were left. If MBK and them had left and they were like, right, well, we have to scramble and get whoever we can. It'd be one thing to judge them then if they picked the next, you know. But it's another thing if they decided these players are better and these can do more.
It was premeditated. Like they definitely set this up. From what we can gather, they definitely set this up. Like they know it was made like with a clear intent in mind to make this team, and then I guess like the NBK Kaylee thing had to happen. But like as far as I know, Apex and Maniac, like those guys were clear cut heading for Titan.
And I'll throw this out there, by the way, for people who don't know. If anyone remembers, this was publicly said by Kenny S when that recursive lineup split up and Apex went over to make the LDLC lineup. He basically said along the lines of like that Apex is sort of like a backstabber and he did this, that and the other. So it sounds like it makes sense that he would be like an instigator within this. Like he would be the one making the move happen, you know.
I guess history repeats itself. Like we're coming full circle. I don't know, man. Like that's what really. I mean, that's what's really interesting to me, and like how this is all shaped up is just, you know, that if Apex was the instigator, if Apex was the one who started this switch, you know, this is the guy who even saying with LDLC, no, we're gonna stick with this lineup. We're gonna keep Uzi. We're not gonna pick up Shoxy. We're gonna keep Uzi. We're confident, and then they get the results behind that as well. And then he still sees fit to bail and take off. Like what we really need right now is just interviews with the players. So we need to get access to the players somehow and get interviews.
Believe it or not, Semmler, I know you don't know this, but some French people don't really like to speak in English that often. They prefer to, and not only that, they kind of resent it when you ask to speak English. You know, they're like, sorry, no English, and then. You know, it's hard to get that information. I'm just going to put that out there, you know, it's crazy. I know no one's ever heard that sort of thing. It's like probably just my experience alone, right? So DDK, what do you think of the new Titan?
A lot of them can speak very good English to boot.
For sure. That's why it's arrogant, dude. Okay, DDK, come on.
So the first thing with this lineup is that you have to ask yourself about the past lineup. Okay, what were the problems with the last Titan lineup? I think many people can probably turn their gaze to Existence and Kenny S. If you're going to look in any two places as to why that lineup may not have been working, you can say maybe the calling and the addition of Kenny S. I think we spoke to it at great length previously. Semmler made loads of great points on that with the Kenny S dynamic. So is this something that it's something to think of? What did these two players lose, and what did they get? So I think what they lost actually was a lot of stability and strategic because the players that they lost were very good at pulling together standard rounds and just kind of making things work, and the team players kind of nice, and you kind of knew what you got with them. I feel apart from, you know, maybe some underperformances from someone like Scream, but when you add in someone like Kaylee, okay, you've got a guy who is an insane AWPer. Like he's really, really good at AWPing in much in the same way that Kenny S is. Maybe I feel like he's got a little bit more control insofar as not in a bad sense, like Kenny S is out of control and just does random shit all the time. But I feel like Kaylee kind of keeps himself a little bit calmer than Kenny S does and doesn't take as many risks. But overall, I think he's very, very skilled with the AWP, much like Kenny S is, and is capable of the same things. So then you have someone like Maniac and Apex, both like Maniac, I feel like is a really good support player, and Apex is a really good fragger. And so you have this like lineup which has like a lot of punch, but like how do you use that punch? Like, how would you actually approach that if you're Existence? For example, a lineup like this, the first thing I think of is that there is this style of playing that Dignitas use a lot, which is like, because CS is a game about timings as well, often at the start of rounds, and lots of teams have different things that they do to try and offset this. But you can play lots of roles with the AWPers very dynamically. Like, you can throw the AWP over to the guy who has the best spawn, and you have like a lot more dynamic is possible. But does that play well to what Existence knows and loves? And is tested with him over the course of time. It's hard to say.
The thing is like Existence is a perfectionist. Existence is definitely like he's a workhorse, man. That guy will work and work and work and not get tired and just keep working, right? But the thing is, when he approaches the game, he wants it. He's very meticulous. He wants it all to be a certain way. And this is how we think about the game. This is how we're going to play the game, and this is what we're going to do in the game, right? And the problem is like as we already went over the first half of this, the top callers and the top teams are now shifting away from that more static approach to playing the game, and going more towards the smart individual play that is going to actually put their team ahead. And I don't know if Existence, because now he's got Kenny, Kaylee, and Apex are 3 players who are known for aggressive pushes, who are known for taking risks, and who are known for being able to get in their opponent's face and mess with it. And that's when they excel, is when they have that freedom. But I don't know if Existence is going to give them the freedom necessary to be able to do that.
Yeah, okay, DDK.
Just one last point. I feel like one extra thought here is that there is a type of calling decision making which focus, like some teams focus more on information control and trying to obscure what they're doing, and other teams focus more on taking risks based on the money and like taking the round by round situationally based purely on money. I feel like having explosive lineups is really good for a play like that, because you can take risky aggressions more often and take like weird kind of EV plays more often. I feel like this is a great lineup for that, but whether or not Existence is up for the task to actually call like that, like you said, I'm not sure. We'll have to see.
Here's the thing for me, because I actually think I see it differently than both of you, because when I look at the problem the old Titan lineup had I don't think it was Existence directly. Like, I think it was something to do with his style, but I'll tie the points together here. Like, there's that famous saying in English, it's like an idiom that says, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And the idea is, if you are like a perfectionist and you try to do something this certain way, well, in real life, that might not be pragmatic. It might not work if you do it that way the best, even though in theory, in the computer simulation, that would be the absolute best way you could do it. And so you will ruin what could have been a compromised, quite good approach by going so far this other way that it doesn't work. And what's funny is, if you're so smart, you got to that position, you might have actually outfought everyone and got to this position where that you have found the secret way to do it. But because you can't do it with the skills and the tool set you have, it won't work. Now, to me, that sums up Existence's career in CSGO. Because here's the part I'm going to get to now. I think the biggest problem in Titan and Very Games the whole time was Scream. And Scream just highlights to me the problem Existence has, which is Existence is one of the worst leaders I've ever seen for someone so tactically good at using star players. Because think of this, right? The worst player in the history of when Very Games were in CSGO, their darkest period was when they actually originally had this lineup they had before now, when they brought Scream in after RPK retired, and they had Kenny S and Scream were their 2 stars. They had 2 stars who both have a super individualistic style of play, and Existence just could not figure out how to make these guys work. His team actually got more skill than when they had RPK, and their level went down. They started coming 3rd or 4th, 5th to 8th, even though in theory they had more skill. And so what you saw was, initially, I think it got covered. People saw, okay, you remember the move after that was Kenny S was removed and they brought Shoxy in. Now, what happened was the team immediately started to go up and eventually they became the best in the world. So here's what I think happened. What happened was removing Kenny S and putting Shoxy in, the team getting better, made people use this logic. Right, well, Kenny S was the problem. Just something about Kenny S specifically couldn't work in that team. But Scream's fine, and now Shoxy's here, and they're really good. And if you remember, they did become the best in the world very briefly for like 3 events. Here's the problem. I think that masked Scream's problems the whole time. Because to me, Scream has been the same player in his team almost the entire time. He's been this inconsistent player the whole time. But he's so good that his inconsistency is like 1 out of 3 games he goes bananas. You know, that's if you're that good and you have a good team, you can cover that problem. Okay, you can have the other games. And here's the key thing. Shoxy He's a star player, yes. So you might think, well, where does that fit in? Because Shoxy was amazing in very games. Okay, Shoxy is a star player, but not in the way that Scream and Kenny S are. Shoxy's like a star player, but who was the thinking star player as well. And crucially, he's really versatile. So he can do different things within a round. He doesn't have to be put in that one position to do that. So actually, I think when they were at their best, it was that Shoxy's style of play sort of took some of the problems. Essentially, he met existence halfway. He was like, I'm the star player, but I can also sort of provide info on what I should do or make a call in the round here. Whereas Kenny S, he'll do his own thing, and Existence wants a certain thing that doesn't match up, but neither of them can get through to the other or communicate why it's not working and what the middle point would be. So to me, the old problem with the old lineup was, listen, that's why actually I understand your reasoning for saying that they'll be worse in that sense, because they lost Smiths and NBK. And to me, Smiths, NBK, and Existence were always on the same page. They always knew exactly what was supposed to happen and what we're going to do here and what the right decision is. Their problem is having Kenny S or Scream on their own, one of them, okay, we can do with one loose cannon who we can't really deal with, but having two, man, that's just too much. Like in their system, Existence couldn't make it work. And so I agree, okay, that's something I am worried about when I see this new lineup. Like, will he fall into the same mistake with Kaylee? Can he now make Kenny S work? That I agree that those are really hard questions. And obviously, I also agree with what you're saying. I think for this lineup to be at their best, Existence has to change his own thinking on the game, essentially.
And that's it. That's it right there. We have to see if he's going to be able to adjust, if he's going to be able to adapt to what he's got on his team right now. Because I think that he's got three players with crazy skill and who are smart. Well, who are smart as well. But like, is he going to be able to actually give them the freedom that they need to be able to follow that gut instinct?
Like, put it this way, the reason why I said it's not directly Existence is because that would imply, okay, that Existence, you know, his philosophy is wrong and it can't work and it won't work in CSGO. No, if you took that old LDLC lineup and just put Existence instead of Happy, I actually think that team would be like an awesome team for him. It would work really well. He'd probably do a similar thing. Maybe it wouldn't be quite as good because it was a particular type of lineup, but I think that would be his sort of dream lineup, okay? People who all know, like, I know that whatever you told me to do, that's my job and I can do this and I'm going to communicate more. He wouldn't win tournaments, but he would be able to get the most out of that sort of team. But instead, he's always had these lineups that had these star players. So to me, that's why I actually think this lineup... We're going to get to this later, but we did actually talk about this on Twitter. I mean, Semmler very briefly, where the opening gambit was he said that he thought the Mercenaries, now LDLC, would be better than this team, Titan. And I said I didn't, okay. Now, the reason why I don't think it's as clear cut as I think you're going to get to when you explain it later is because to me, the key thing about this Titan thing is, because to me, the main problem was their stars couldn't live up to the star level. Like Kenny S, here's the thing, Kenny S never underperformed when he was in Titan and Very Games. He just used to perform and it's like he wasn't playing the same game as everyone else. He could have rounds where he got 3 kills, but it had no impact on the game and those 3 kills would never have won you the round. So it's like he wasn't individually underperforming, he just wasn't doing anything that integrated into the team. Now Scream literally underperforms. I've made this case a million times, I'll say it again, okay. If Scream has this incredible aim, which he clearly does, he should be dominating the game. He should be able to put himself in great situations and his team should put him in situations where he applies that aim and as a result, he's out shooting everyone in his aim duel. He's taking this entry frag here. He's winning this 1v1. But actually, Scream's style of play is so extreme that I actually think he limits himself just to his amazing aim to some degree. And as a result, he actually doesn't win as many 1v1s as you think because he tries to go for the crazy headshot instead of just body spraying, you know. Like, that's a general point. But my point here is, when he brought in this news players to Titan, here's how I see it could work. Okay, when they had the problem before where they had to have Kenny S and Scream as their 2 stars in the post-Shoxy era, well now, if you bring them in, and as a result, okay, NBK kept doing his role. And to me, NBK's strength is that he could be a star, but instead he was like making himself the half star. Some games he'd have a star type performance, but otherwise he's trying to be more of a team player than he is a star, even though he's got the skill set to be a star. In this team here, I think of it like this, okay? Kenny S, like I said before, he can already perform. I'm not worried about him. But who's going to take the Scream role? If they give Kaylee the Scream role, actually, I think Kaylee's a pretty consistent performer. Like, actually, he can play with the AWP, he can play with the rifle. I think if you put him in good secondary star positions, he can be more effective than Scream was in the old Titan. Now,
I think he's also proven to be easier, like quite easy to lead, because I think Happy's LDLC was predicated upon players who were all very much on the same page.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
I think a lot of this comes down to whether it's going to be tier 2 leadership or tier 3 leadership. And if we find a way where it's going to be tier 3 leadership for Titan, where they're able to spread it out across the board, and you're going to be able to rely on these players to make the right calls, and it's going to be more of a, I don't know, like a homogenous unit basically between like the NIP or the VP. If Titan can find a way to make it so that those 4 players click like that, and then you kind of have Kenny S, I guess, who does his thing. Then we're looking at like really scary potential for a team like that.
Because here's the key thing: when I went down how I modeled the star players there, where they had Kenny S and Stream of the Stars, and then NBK was the half star. Even though NBK is brilliant, I always thought NBK was more towards the existence style of thinking, and as a result, he also didn't interface that well with Scream. So to me, Apex is the X factor here. Because if Apex is going to take the sort of half-star role, like I'm putting NBK in, here's the thing, okay, this might sound really abstract, but me and Anders did this tournament, the one that was at the Prague Challenge last year,
the Prague Challenge,
where this Nostalgia team had Taz and Neo, Apex and Kenny S, and then who was the Russian guy they had? Overdrive. And the whole gimmick of this team was that they somehow won the event and beat like Na'Vi and beat the British team, despite the fact that they had to all speak in English. And if you know anything about Kenny S, his English isn't great, and Overdrive has no English, and the Poles are just, well, they're okay level of English, okay? So literally part of how they won is that they just decided before each game, right? Here's our T-spots. So Taz and Neo always go together. Apex and Kenny also always go together, and Overdrive does whatever the fuck Overdrive is going to. He was going to get no kills anyway, okay? And that team was like 4v5. So the key point is, part of what actually worked in that tournament was that Apex and Kenny S played off each other really well, actually. They had a really good synergy. Like it's like Apex knew how to use Kenny S. Like, okay, he would do like the classic things that if you're an AWPer, you love to have. Like, you know the guy where if I'm going to AWP Banana and I'm on T side and I'm going to go up to take that first AWP shot, it's great if I have a guy who actually will agree to run out first to draw the other AWPer's shot. And so when that guy, the AWPer misses him, I then shoot the AWPer. And so actually, even though I'm going into a CT position, I can get the drop on him. That sort of play actually isn't default in the game, you know. You need people who actually synergize really well and know. Because the whole point is, if you do that 5 times and the guy who runs out just gets shot, but then doesn't do it right, and the other guy doesn't come out in time, and then the guy repositions and shoots the AWPer as well, then the guy who runs out is going to be like, I'm not fucking doing that again. Like, we both die when I do that. Like, it's actually, it's a really subtle point you have to bring up. So
there's actually like a way to explain this, like simplify it. And it's like this, because there are lots of spots where you should take risks in CS, obviously, or where players like to take risks. But the whole idea of team play revolves around making stuff safe. Because with team play, you can make a lot of risks actually pretty safe and change the kind of percentages. And that, like you said, that's not actually something that a lot of teams are good at, and it's not something a lot of players are good at, or even realize that they have the option to do. Because as you said, like some people, they don't like connect on that level. Like the communication there isn't like that. They don't understand that role intrinsically. So that's actually like a really, really big deal.
Well, it's like another thing. I'm sure we've all said this when casting. Another pet peeve I have in casting is that I really hate it when people do a move like that is essentially on its surface okay. If we're facing, if I've got Kenny S as my AWPer and I'm going to jump across like that, and the CT AWPer's Guardian, then I'm actually already accepting that like a very likely outcome is I will die. But I'm agreeing that it's worth me dying to trade me for Guardian. Because if Kenny S kills Guardian, now Kenny S is free to just own their whole team. So the idea there is we're agreeing it's a trade. But that's why the one thing that... Listen, the best scenario, obviously, is I jump across, Guardian misses, then Kenny S kills Guardian. That's the ideal. That won't happen most of the time. But one thing that can never happen, if we're going to do this, is I can never jump across die. Kenny S doesn't come out early enough, I went too soon, and then Kenny S gets killed as well. That can never happen. So the crucial thing is, here's the point I'm going to make that I always get peeved in casting is, I hate it when teammates in pro games essentially bait their teammate. But they don't bait him to get the kill. They don't get the upside of the bait. They just bait him, and then it's a 1v1 that they have. So that guy now just died for nothing. You didn't make the trade. You actually just gave him away for nothing. That's like a point I always go crazy about in casting, you know.
Sure.
It's a big deal. But there's like a huge concept as well about like positioning on maps and like how that changes everything, especially for the terrorist side, obviously, because they're trying to gain position constantly. And there's like so many teams who don't have actually like good movement in sites because they don't actually realize that, okay, my job here is actually to die for this guy, because that like I trade my life for positioning for the team, and then that positioning then turns into an overwhelming defensive advantage or a plan or something. Like that's like a that is like a
well, the
really
point you're kind of
point.
making here, which is another key strategy point, is there are certain maps and certain positions where you falling back keeps you alive, but puts your team in such a bad position strategically to get back in that site that actually you gave up more advantage than you would have by dying and maybe damaging someone and getting really early information and rotating fast. You know, it's like you actually that's the sort of thing, though, unfortunately, players can't make a decision in-game on that. You have to drill them on that, I think, and have the philosophy, like, in our team, we never give up. Like, actually, in basketball, I'll give you another analogy. In basketball, there's certain teams who are really hardcore defensive teams who used to have rules that sound stupid. Like, on our team, no one's ever allowed a layup. Like, if the guy goes for a layup, you have to foul him. Now, the idea there isn't that you can actually foul every time, because in basketball, if you foul every time, they get free throws and you would lose the game because of that. But the principle is, we know the natural reaction is to never allow the easy layup. Like, we never give up on a play like that, okay? That's what you're trying to set up. And so in the same way, a team like you're describing would be like, okay, in our team, maybe we're not really good at super hard retakes. So we have to agree, we can never let ourselves get into the super bad retake.
The rule system again.
We're willing to get blown out completely when they're running the site rather than give up all the position, you know. I think it's a good general point to make.
It is a good general point, and the way that it applies to Titan is that they do have 4 players who are capable of that, who are capable of those kinds of positions and making those kinds of decisions. And yes, okay, so there is experience on the team. Now, are they going to be able to mesh well enough to be able to make that experience actually work? Is the chemistry going to be there? That's the big thing that we're all waiting to see right now. Is the chemistry there on Titan so that they can actually progress together and make the right calls when they need to? And we're going to come back to that later, actually, with Epsilon.
Okay, so let's go to the next team, which is LDLC. Now, this team, for anyone who's following this chat now, LDLC isn't any of the players you thought of before. LDLC now is, okay, they've got Happy still, they've got him, but everyone else is different. Now they've got NBK and Smiths came over, and then they have Shocks, who was in Epsilon with Kiyoshima. So they've had basically 4 players come in just to add to Happy. So they brought in 2 of the role players essentially from Titan, and then they brought in the 2 stars from Epsilon. That's LDLC now. So start off again, Semmler. Who is LDLC now to you?
LDLC to me are that team that are making a real attempt at a tier 3 sort of approach to the game, which is a NIP VP Dignitas sort of approach to the game. And that's why I put them ahead of Titan. Is I think that they are trying to adapt to where this game, to where the meta, or you know what's actually happening in the game, where it's going now. I think that's the team for me that stands out, that are trying to make that change and try and get ahead. And already just watching their games right now, you can already see how that's starting to develop. Shoxy, I think another point that I made and that you were just like, oh really, you know, was the fact that this team is totally built to allow Shoxy to just function perfectly. And this is like the Shoxy where when you looked at an Epsilon originally, right? You're the 2 ways that Epsilon could have gone, and you saw that Shoxy went the other way, which is basically taking a lot of responsibility on himself to train his teammates and to make the calls and all that. And in this one, it's not that at all. Now Shoxy has all of the freedom to just basically do whatever the hell he wants, and he makes the mid-round calls. He helps to make the mid-round calls, but he still has all of the freedom to be able to just walk around. He has full trust in his teammates because he has 4 very experienced teammates to fall back on, and NBK, Smiths, and Happy. And he also has a very smart up-and-coming player, Kiyoshima, which is why he ended up coming along from Epsilon. Is that Shoxy just saw the potential? He was like, "You're coming with us," and then so that's how that team comes around. Shoxy is going to be the point man that you can think about, really. And this is there's so much to talk about with this team as well. Like, why that it makes it really interesting is because we were talking about how ops and certain teams, how they approach the op earlier. Smiths is a capable opper, a very capable opper, but in no way is he an integral part to the winning strategy. Like, if he doesn't actually manage to land those sick, ridiculous Kenny-esque Guardian shots, that's actually not that big of a deal for this team, because that's when NBK steps in, or Happy, or Shoxy, or Kiyoshima. Like, you still have 4 very good riflers and very smart riflers on the team. So the op, it's like, great, Smiths, do it, bro. Like, if you get it, awesome, sick. We're in an even better position than we were before. But like, if they actually manage to get that tier 3 leadership going, where NBK sets it up, Shoxy takes the mid, NBK wraps it up, and Happy is there to tie it all together with a nice little bow. They have 3 very smart minds and 2 very experienced smart minds. So when you think about that team, you're just looking at it, just being like, okay, then.
I've got to ask you this though. If you or I had been given these players like a draft, and we were creating teams, and let's say one of us created this team, we would probably create it like this, like, right, this is great. Like, maybe, let's imagine I was creating it with my model before, where I had MBK as like the 3rd star, and he potentially could be a 2nd star if it was the right lineup. I might have created it like, okay, I'm going to have Shocks my main star, MBK 2nd star, Kiyoshima 3rd star.
I don't have stars though, Thorin. This is a point where you and I like disagree. It's just we don't see the same. I don't see stars. I just see people who are capable of filling a role. And the role is,
here's the thing though. you give the stars the best roles, the role that suits them the most. Everyone in the game, everyone in the game can't have but everyone in the game can't have the CT position they want usually, because there's so many maps that it's unlikely that everyone has their ideal CT position. Okay, usually you give the star player his ideal CT position because he's going to do the most with it. Okay, so as a result, that's what I mean by star, the one that you put the most focus on in the team. And then that's why I say second star, he's like we give the first one everything he wants, then the second one we've got quite a lot left, so you can still have this, but eventually once you get to the third star, that's why I defined MBK that way. It's someone where usually maybe he could have been like maybe he could look better if he had the second or first.
I think that's a weak approach though. I think that's a weak approach. You're not going to give one guy everything that he wants, and that's the real approach to it. Is everybody it's going to be a meeting basically where you're all going to sit down and you're all going to be like, okay, these are kind of the positions. These are the positions that I would want on this map, and then they go through the entire fucking map and the entire CT side and the entire T side and figure out, okay, well, this makes the most sense in this situation. And then they're going to figure out, they're not going to go off of one player and give him all of his place because he's the superstar of the team or whatever the fuck. No, they're going to go through it all and be like, okay, actually, this makes the most sense because Kiyoshima, maybe he's a little bit less, but you'd be better in this position. And then they figure it out that way so that it's spread out across the team. It's not the one guy. Like, that's the thing. It's not just one guy who makes it all and that you should be giving it all to because he's the superstar, or you have two guys, and they're the superstars or whatever. It's whatever the fuck gets that round for that team. That's what they're gonna do. And it doesn't.
Have you ever seen rounds in game where a team does a half buy and what they do is they just have whoever was the ones who had the money, they're the ones who keep the rifles and they buy them. That's an example of why my version of thinking actually isn't used by pros, and where actually I think pros are weak. I've seen rounds, this used to happen a lot in 1.6, okay, and I actually, this isn't a massive secret that I'm going to reveal now, but I actually told this to the Polish team when they used to have like Cuban, Lord, Pasha, Neo, Taz. They used to do this a lot. Sometimes they'd do a partial buy, and in 1.6 you could do really extreme buys, okay? You could literally
buy these days.
You could buy one AK and have the rest have deagles, but the idea was, because you're on T side, if you could make something happen, you could then get a gun by killing a guy, then you have two guns, and then you turn the two guns, you have those guys going first, so it's still two guns facing CTs with guns. So you could make it work if you really got everything out with the gun, okay? The problem was, I'm not joking, they had rounds that they would keep losing, where they would have Lord was the one who had the money, and he was in theory the worst player, him and the Cuban were the two worst, okay? And they would buy the AK, and then Neo would be running around with the deagle. And I just said to them once, right, listen, you guys can do whatever you want with your philosophy, but let's sit down right now. That makes no sense, right? Neo is the best player ever in 1.6. He has to have the AK because he's got a better chance of killing the guy who then gets the second gun to the other player. So in that sort of approach, you have to have a hierarchy of like, we know this guy is the most skilled and will be the best for this role.
That's a very selective. Well, okay, that example sure is going to be the best for the role, but at the that's a very different sort of situation.
Okay, but Semmler, you're agreeing with it now, but most teams don't do that. Even now in CS:GO, you see teams where the bad player is the one with the AK.
True. You do see it. You do see it. I mean, Hellraisers do it all the time.
By the way, I think most players agree with you. I don't think they follow my philosophy on how it goes at all. I think most of them believe all that stuff about, now we're all equal and we all do our part and everyone has his job. I'm sure they all think that.
It's a much more complex thing than you make it out to be. It's not that clear. You're not going to say, oh yeah, you're the fucking superstar, so go ahead and take that position because whatever. We're going to bow down to you, and we're going to hold on. Can I get in there too? Like, no. No. Chemistry is incredibly important for a team to actually function well. And if you're just going to be like, yeah, this guy's like the boss, so we're just going to do what he says, that team isn't actually going to do anything, I don't think.
No, it's not that you do what he says, it's that he gets the stuff that's most suited. Like sometimes he might not even, okay, here's an example, okay. Get Right is the most famous lurker in the world, right? Everyone knows Get Right's style of play. Fun fact for you, Get Right didn't come up with that style of play. He did not choose that style of play. Here's a little quick history lesson. It's not going to last long. In 2009, when Get Right joined Fnatic, he was an entry fragger. Him, Gux, and Forrest used to run in the sites and kill everyone. That's how Fnatic won. They were one of the best teams ever, and that was their style. How did Get Right become a lurker? What happened was when he went to SK, the in-game leader for SK was called Roban. And Roban actually said to Get Right, in this team, his words were, you're going to be the son of a bitch. Like, you're going to be the guy where every time we win a round, the enemy's like, oh, that son of a bitch, why was he behind me? That's bullshit. Like, he's just camping. Like, that's the whole role, is that something he'd seen about Get Right. He thought, like, you would be perfect for that role. Like, listen, I've already got Forrest as my entry fragger, and I've got these other aimers. So what I'm going to do with you is, you have the skill set of an entry fragger, but actually, I've seen the way you like to play 1v1s, because actually, here's what's funny. I think what Roban picked up on was, in the latter days of Fnatic, after Gux had left and they just had Forrest and Get Right with the stars, actually Get Right got a bit selfish. It's like he didn't trust his teammates entirely. So he used to play a bit like this campy style, but he had the old role. So now it wasn't working that much. He used to get his kills, but they didn't have that much impact on the game. So what I think Robban saw was like, okay, rather than convince this guy, don't play like that and you can trust us, the simplest way is just give him that role in the game. Like, make it so what he wants to do is what his actual role in the game is now. And amazingly, it not only worked in 1.6, but it's actually become the most impactful role of any player, Get Right doing that role in CSGO historically, you know, because just... But what's funny is, like I'm saying in this example here, Get Right didn't demand that. He didn't say, listen, I have to be the one who goes to the back and does. Actually, someone else saw what it was that he should do. But here's the key point I'm making. When I say the star, what I'm doing is I'm deciding what foundation point will my team be built from. So my foundation point for Nip is I want Get Right to be in a lot of 1vx situations. I want him to go in last. I want him to use his smarts like that. So now, how do I build backwards from that? So building backwards from that, okay, I need to set up rounds where Get Right's going to be in like... he's going to be the last man coming in. So, okay, I'm going to have like Freeberg going first, and then Forrest is going to go in and he's going to pick up people with low health that Freeberg's damaged or identified. Then Exist's going to come in the middle. And so I'm tiering it by whose job is whose. But I have to start somewhere. I can't just start nowhere and go, right, you know what? Here's a hat. I've got all the roles in. I've thrown them out. And we got all 5 roles. We've got all 5 that we need. It just so happens we've got them all. We have to start somewhere with the theory of it.
Sure we do. And it's certainly not a hat, and it's somewhere in the middle. I think a lot of this comes down to a happy medium. It's all about basically having that meeting. DDK, you've been quiet for a long time. Do you want to head in on any of this?
Well, you guys have covered quite a lot of points here, so it's hard to jump in.
Just pick one that you think's worth talking about.
So about the star player thing, it's an interesting one. I think at the very, very, very top level of the game, it's always going to be different to anything else. And
DDK, I don't want to cut you off, right? But let me just ask you a question right now. This is going to go into another game, okay? You're going to answer your same point here, but I'm going to ask you this one question. If your team has Milton in it, in Quake World, do you just put him? Do you just put other people in their good role, or do you base the team around Milton? What do you think?
Yeah, the thing about Milton is you put him on the team and you win, so it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. You can't. So he's not going to be the quad runner in your team.
Well, of course, you give Milton everything. This is actually the funny thing about it as well.
Unfold, please. And that's not a setup, Sam. I didn't genuinely know what his answer would be there.
Yeah, no. So basically, Milton, just a quick lesson. He's basically considered the best Quake World player of all time. Basically,
he's like the Get Right of,
in 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, and 4 and 4. He's got what he can do, no one else can do it. And he started out playing in this really shitty team called Satanic Slaughter Clan, who in Division 3, but he would just always destroy everybody, even though he's just carrying like crazy. Then he went to Division 1 and he destroyed everyone. He just carried everyone still. So, and it's just ridiculous. You give him the quads. He has the best decision making. This is actually because his individual skill itself wasn't somehow crazy, but when you watch him, he somehow always gets into these crazy situations and always makes the right call in split seconds. That was the amazing thing about him, in my opinion.
Let me give you an analogy, DDK. Basically, Milton is like Shox when he was at his best in very games. I actually think if you put them in, if you had those sports science shows they do where they have a UFC guy kick a bag and you see how hard does he kick. If you could do the equivalent of the lab breakdown on CSGO players, I'm certain that not only would Forrest outperform Get Right in skill, just raw skill, but definitely Scream would outperform Shox. But in game, when they're at their best, Shox and Get Right are better than Scream and Forrest, and most people could agree on that, So in this concept, that's why I think Milton's the best, right? He knows his skill set and he maxes it out.
Yeah, this is actually a really important point. Is that there comes to a point, I think, when you reach a certain level where you kind of not necessarily make peace. Oh, I'm the worst player, but you kind of make peace with how the dynamics should work based on the realistic limitation that you see yourself. Because when you're thinking about yourself as a player, you always are going to just to be a good player, you have to have maximum belief in yourself. You've got to think disproportionately about your own skill level and your own competency. But there's obviously this situation where when you're in a really, really good team, the team cohesion is incredibly important. And for a unit to work correctly, everyone has to be doing knowing what everyone has to know that not everyone is doing this job in this situation. Everyone has to know that it's this guy in this situation. And I actually agree with Thorin that not to maybe the extent, but I feel from my perspective is I want the best decision makers. Because in CS, the longer the round goes on, I want to have the people that are left who have the best decision making. Especially because in CS, I'm for example, you were saying with actually, hang on, I'll scratch that point. But just to continue this one, you can have situations where it goes 2 on 4 or 2 on 5 or 3 on 2, whatever it is, and those guys have to communicate between each other, and then that's incredibly important. Then how the round goes. And that there are players that perform so much better than others in that role, just because the more decisions that come along, the better that they are able to play than other players. And I feel like that's kind of like how I look at the game, at least.
That's what makes it very tough to play versus teams like Na'Vi and Hellraisers, right? Because on their T side, they take so long that they actually force you into making mistakes. Because if you make the wrong call as to where they're going to be at which time on the map, you're screwed. Just that there's not enough time for you to rotate into a good position to be able to stop them from getting onto a site, which is how Na'Vi managed to get those 20 seconds left on the clock, and they get the site. It's because they figured out exactly what the other guys are doing, and then they hit them right where it hurts.
Well, that's what's funny is, okay, I always criticize both Na'Vi and Hellraisers for the same reason, where I think that they've got like too much aim and I don't think they'll win big events because they have a limitation, okay? But what's funny is, I never say that they play the wrong style of CS for their team. I say in a perfect world I don't like their style, but here's the key thing, for their skill set, that's actually exactly the right style, because what essentially they're doing is they're focusing all of these sick aimers into one area super quickly like that. They're not going to go in partially. You have no reaction. You essentially have to perfectly guess what they're going to do.
Exactly.
To give like a MOBA equivalent, in something like Dota or League of Legends, they're the equivalent of like the champion that's just a burst champion. Your aim is to get in, delete people super quickly, just attack them with all your abilities, and the enemies... aim is to make you not be able to get the positioning to go in, so you either die immediately or they just use that. Well, in Dota you can use like CC on them, for example, that stops them being effective. In the same way, you could think of like if you do the perfect rotation as CT, you've got the right setup and it just blocks the attack immediately as it comes in. The same principles apply in that sense. So the point is, each team needs to know what the strengths of the team are in that sense. Like a different type of player might be a grinding player who just gradually walks you down, just pokes you down, like to give MOBA terms here for anyone who watches these games. And the reason I give these terms, by the way, is because actually in CS, as you're seeing in this discussion, a lot of these things aren't defined, these concepts in CS, unfortunately. Whereas in some of these other games, they've got like a metagame and linguistics of how you describe it.
To me, that's the beauty of CS as well, though, is that it is much more free-flowing as far as what you're... Because everybody has the same actual abilities in the game. After that, it does come down to just, the roles, but anybody can kind of fill those roles at the same time to a lesser extent. In Dota... or LoL, or Han, or any of these MOBAs, like, it's very clear-cut as to what you could do based on your hero's abilities. Your fucking role is to go and drop wards around because you have one ultimate, you get in, you do that ultimate, and then we don't care if you die or not as long as you hit that ultimate. And
that's also why
the other guy, right? But everybody can have an AK in CS, and everybody can walk around and get those headshots in CS. So that's why it's so hard to pin roles on people.
That's actually... This will sound like a funny side point, but that's also why people don't understand. People get really mad when like a really great StarCraft 2 player like Marine King Prime goes to League of Legends and they think to themselves, right, well, League of Legends is a really noob game with less skill, mechanical ceilings lower, but Marine King Prime has insane mechanics and he came from a strategical game. He should be better than them all. No, here's the reason why it isn't. Because essentially what Marine King Prime does in StarCraft 2 and what every CS player does is they actually do play more than one role within the same round and within the same game. But the idea is, if you'll get right, you play a 10 out of 10 lurking game, and you play like a 5 out of 10 entry frag game if for some reason you had to, and you play like a 7 out of 10 mid game, and if you're Shoxy, maybe you play a 9 out of 10 mid game, and a 3 out of 10 early game, and a 10 out of 10 late. Whatever the setup is, the idea is you have to perform in multiple. So Marine King Prime had to be able to play 17 different styles all at once, and yeah, maybe be their best at one. But in League of Legends, you essentially, to some degree, have one style, and because you have the one style, now you can't be like 8 out of 10. You have to be like 10 out of 10 for sure, because if you aren't, there's a million players who we can pick from to find the guy who is. And so to me, that's actually a difference between the games. And it's not a positive or a negative either way. It just means that you have to do more in one way, and in this game you have to do better at this, if that makes sense.
It's a different thing. Go ahead, D.
No, I was just gonna say I actually want to see more of that in CS, because like there's a lot of ways like what someone was saying is like really, really true. CS is actually really, really dynamic, but there are a lot of like ways to create set plays and ways where teams can actually control what is happening to the best of their ability. And that like there are situations where you can create this on every single map in CS as the T side or the CT side, and you can say, this is the guy that goes in first, and the reason is because we want these two players because we think that maybe they're stronger at actually doing the site setup afterwards or whatever the hell it is, like getting the follow-up frags once the ground is gained, and that guy's the best at actually making the first kill, and you want this guy because he's really good at support, or that is completely possible. And the thing is that if you do break things down into those roles, then actually it's actually kind of more interesting to watch because things are more clearly defined. within the chaos, which is actually, as far as like a spectator tool goes, is really amazing. That's like one of the reasons why QuakeCode is so fun to watch, because the role is always, I mean, if you understand the game, it's always very, very clearly like define what's happening within the, and it's very chaotic at the same time, so it becomes very entertaining. And as far as like people trying to actually get better as teams themselves, they can actually see skill sets within different perspective. And like if you have like a player that like was saying like I want to be an entry fragger, then there's actually like very specific things that only that guy needs to worry about. And so there's lots of theory behind that, but I actually feel like that's like be quite nice to move more into that territory if it were possible. But I also feel like strategically the game isn't there yet as well.
Well, when I thought of the reason why it stood out for me for LDLC now, because they were mercenaries before, right? But LDLC now, why it stood out for me is because there was actually, the first time I saw that lineup, I instantly actually kind of had roles already set for everybody, like very clear roles what they would fill out. There was some give and take between the two, like the NBK happy switch actually.
Yeah, that's what we were doing. Actually, the diversion came from, by the way. I was going to ask you. That's what I was questioning. I was thinking to myself, well, I would have happy as my in-game leader. Okay,
and I would have.
So talk about this now. Why NBK is an in-game leader? Why is that going to work?
It was funny because you had that. I think it was a global reaction basically when the news went live that NBK was actually leading, because you see that lineup and you're just like happy. You're just like and then you're just like what? Like what? NBK is leading, but the thing is that NBK has it seems like he has a very clear way as to how he wants this to go. Because already just watching them play, they already seem to be able to play off of each other very, very well. And I got a brief word with him, and he says like, okay, like this is going to be temporary, or it's like I'm on a test run where I'm gonna run the show for a bit, and if it doesn't work, then we still have options. Shoxy, happy, like that's the power of this team, though. Really, is the fact that they have so much experience put into 4 players basically, and then Kyoshima, who's getting up there, right? But they have those 4 players to fall back on to make calls and to basically push the team forward. I don't think it's that big of a deal, actually. I think it's actually interesting that NBK is willing to change it up, and he says he's like super fucking happy with actually calling. He says it's a completely different feeling from what he's been experienced to before, and he's never led before. So for him, it's a totally fresh experience, and he's loving it.
From what I saw so far from their play, I mean, I was actually very shocked to actually learn that it was NBK calling like everybody else, like you mentioned. But what really interested me is that NBK was not afraid to actually make some of the more kind of like aggressive decisions. And I could see in a lot of his decisions that he was completely just looking at economy and understanding. Like he had this very clear understanding of risk, like where the risk can get us like a little bit behind, but it can get us, if like it actually goes in our way, get us like way ahead. And the thing is that a lot of teams don't like to take those kinds of risks, and it was just great to see, because there's certain things like on Dust 2, like the lower dark take is like incredibly strong. That's insanely strong. If you understand that their economy is too weak for them to have an AWPer, or that you create like a situation with a smoke in a way that allows you to get into the lower dark really quickly, that is so crazy strong. And not like many teams do it, and it's something that needs to be explored more. This is one of the reasons why Dignitas are actually so good, is because like this concept I was talking about previously about making things safe. Like the whole point about the CT, like the whole idea about CTs in Counter-Strike is that the CTs have to figure out what the Ts are doing and then get the best setup to defend it. That is what it's about. So it's about information from that perspective. So Dignitas are great at taking proactive plays, and that's one of the reasons why they are so crushing on the CT side and why they defeat so many teams. And it's the same thing with what NBK was trying to do. I could see that he was trying to do this. He was trying to take proactive roles, pressure economy, but also using information very well. Like, so I was actually really impressed by what I saw so far from their calling, and I thought for sure it was happy, but it's a very limited sample size, but it looks a lot more progressive than happy.
Happy apparently helps with like strategies going into it and overall. Like they really are trying to spread it out, because Shoxy went back to like the mid calling that we saw on Titan that he was effective on. I mean, hell, he was doing that with Existence when they were at the top of their game. Those mid round calls, he was helping a lot with that sort of thing, right? So he's back in that role that he was very comfortable in. NBK is going to take a crack at leading, but so far from what I've seen, it looks solid.
Yeah,
Smith is just that steady rock. Like he's going to be like the guy who's going to go for the off, but he's also able to chime in if necessary. And it's not a huge impact if he doesn't have a big if he doesn't get those big games with the op, but he's totally capable of getting those big games with the op. And then Kyoshima is just like this. Kyoshima is like a pit bull that they actually have to kind of keep leashed. Like he has some crazy aggression in him and the ability to get headshots. And now I think that they're trying to form him to be able to use it wisely, right? So he fits in well with the rest of the unit.
It's actually like a point about Smiths that I wanted to make, because actually earlier you guys were talking about AWPers, of course, and you're talking about like star players, and like we have this like dynamic Kenny S, Kaylee, 2-star AWPers. And the funny thing about it is that if you want to have your risk taker, if your risk taker's an AWPer, the reward is huge, but the loss is also like equally huge.
Devastating.
So,
yeah.
And Thorin made this point, and I think this is really, really true, is that you have these star players, but they don't have to do everything. If Smiths just plays passively and does like certain specific jobs that he just has to cover this, he doesn't have to like make any crazy picks or shots. He's got the rest of the team working towards like making risks safe, because it's quite hard often to like make it really safe for AWPers. And the risk is always going to be there, and it's not just a risk on he dies, but economically speaking, it can really hurt your team. And so like I really love the fact that like Smiths gets to come out of the shadow of Kenny S, but he gets to not play like Kenny S, like a star AWPer. I like that they don't have a star AWPer. I think that's going to do wonders for their team.
That's what I always wondered, is like Smiths was actually coming into his own. Like when you think about Dust 2 Titan, you thought about Smiths. You didn't think about anybody else on that team. You thought about Smiths because he was consistently getting above 20 frags with an op consistently on that map. So you're thinking, okay, then, right? You know, like Smiths is starting to become a force. He's starting to use it on Inferno. He's, you know, getting like he's really starting to get good at this gun. And then they brought Kenny S in, and you were just like, well, now Smiths has to relearn everything that he's doing. Now he gets to go back and start putting that back together again. So
I mean, the thing is, when you say like when you were describing their DDK, basically like a different way to say that is you need it for the way you'd use someone like Smiths is the way you make it less risk. Is the reason why his style of AWPing is less risk than Kenny S and Guardian is because they have to be more risk. It has to be more likely that they die so that they can get more frags. They have to put themselves in danger to get the kills, okay? Their idea is if 3 people run down the corner, they're going to shoot one, rescope, shoot the second, shoot that. Well, if you miss any of those shots, odds are you die within the sequence, okay? Or you kill them all. Someone like a Smiths, or actually this is where Fiflaren used to be a really good example of an AWPer. Instead, they're using the AWP as in they cover the angle on a way more defensive line, and there's 2 things that you accomplish just by having him AWP defensively there. 1, maybe he does kill the first guy and that delays the rush a little bit. 2, maybe he misses, but because he's more defensive, he can pull back and he doesn't die himself. Yes, that in itself not only gives you time to rotate while you've got a man alive, but also it makes the terrorists come in slower because they know there's an AWPer there. So, oh yeah, he doesn't get the upside of killing everyone, which is what you think of with the great AWPer, but he also does, crucially, by taking away some of the reward, you take away a lot of the risk as well. So now listen, within that sort of a setup, if you do have Kenny S, obviously you want him to take the risk. Because if you don't have Kenny S, you're going to have someone else be the guy who kills everyone. Someone has to kill them at the end of the day. So the idea is you're putting the responsibility for who does which part of the action in a different area, right? And
it's like, it makes a lot more sense as well. Because if you look at like this team could be freaking amazing. And the interesting thing about it as well is that if you're like shifting risk away from the AWPer, you create the situation for the CTs where if they want to take risks, they can do it like in pairs with the riflers. And like this is like makes so much more sense than having, because if you want to like make stuff safe for an AWPer, like always guarantee trays, always make sure that his risks actually pay off. I mean, it's not always, you know, sometimes you just let him do the timing pick or something like that. But if you want to do something else in the middle of the round, then you kind of need him to have some support there. But if you have support for the AWPer, like the way the AWP and the rifle works together, it's like not so awesome. Like AWPs are really good by themselves, like you said, to hold like a defensive line. That's like really, really strong. That's a great solo role for an AWP. So by taking a player away in the middle of a round to like make something look safe like that, or just have a huge risk by having him go in by himself and then losing the guy who controls middle, and then, like it gives better options to the other team. Like I feel like the aggressive options are much safer overall, more consistent by having a safer AWPer in this way. Like Fiflaren on Nip, I think is a fantastic example, especially because people give him so much shit because he's like, oh, he's not amazing or anything. He's not a star player. He's not as good as the other guys, whatever. I think it's like, I actually think this team is going to could very well be top 2 very quickly.
Agreed.
Well, the thing is, when you talk like that, that's part of why when I separate it up, I use the term star player, but you can disagree with that. But the concept is where you put responsibility and where the weight is to do certain
exactly,
things.
Yes. Yeah.
So my point would be, when you talk about the Fiflaren issue, okay, I would describe it like this. if Fiflaren needs to get 20 kills in this game for Nip to win, then he's not going to most of the time, and as a result, he will fail and Nip will lose. Okay. Now that your problem there is that you've done a bad job as the team leader. If his job is that he had to get the 20 kills, because on my team I've got Get Right and Forest, and then I've got Freeberg and Exist. If Fiflaren has to get the 20 kills, odds are Get Right or Forest didn't get their kills. They're the ones who were supposed to do that part of the round. It's not as set as that, obviously, but as a general average, there's a reason why, like in basketball, for example, you have to have a certain average, and you actually, general managers literally add up the points per game, and they say, right, in our style of play, are we going to get to this amount each game? It doesn't work quite like that in CS, but the general principle applies. You can look at tournaments where Get Right has lower averages, and they're the ones they lose.
Yeah, exactly. And wasn't that? I mean, that was one of your own interviews with Fiflaren, wasn't it? Where he said, "If I'm top ranking, there's a problem. Like something's not right. You know, if I'm the one sitting at the top of the scoreboard for the team right now."
Like the funny thing is, in that scenario, the layman guy who's making what we agree is a silly comment, where he's saying like, "Right, cut Fiflaren because he lost this scenario." In that scenario, now listen, there are other reasons as to why you could say, I think Fiflaren should be replaced, and those could be legitimate. The reason why that's not a legitimate complaint is because it's actually, he set the analysis up poorly there. He said, right, when we, essentially, I'll rephrase what the layman's saying, so it sounds ridiculous if you describe it. Okay, what he's saying is, when you put Fiflaren in situations where his teammates aren't doing their roles and he has to do a role that's not his role and that he's not skilled enough to do, then he fails, therefore he should be cut. It's like, well, within your own argument there, you can see that some of his teammates aren't doing their role. So if they aren't doing their role, either fix that or maybe you even need to replace one of his teammates. Because the way I'll tie this in is that's why I always used to identify Scream within Titan as the player I thought didn't do his role. Like, as in, he was given this role over and over and he couldn't quite get up to what you needed to win the games in that role. So to me, Scream fucked up way more in Titan games than Smith's ever did, and yet Smith's obviously overall would have worse games overall on average. Like, he would have less kills or he would have less highlight rounds, but the difference was Smith's was doing his job like a motherfucker. Scream was just like, it's like sometimes he did it, sometimes he did nothing, vaguely approaching it. And so actually you could make a case, again, if I make a sports example, if our team is playing awesome defense and we're just always losing 1-0 and we never score the goals that we need to win the game, odds are we need to get a new striker. We don't need to replace the star defenseman or even like a serviceable defenseman. If we have some striker we pay 30 million and he just never scores, at that point, even though he is objectively the most skilled player in the team and could obviously beat the shit out of the defender in a 1v1 game, actually the guy not doing his job is the striker in this scenario, which unfortunately that's an aspect. That sort of analysis, I've noticed fans never go that route. They'll never blame Guardian, they'll never blame Scream. Those guys will always be exempt from it. And so what's funny is people think if I say Fiflaren can be replaced, that I'm actually buying into that philosophy of like always cut the worst guy. I'm not. In some teams, like I'm saying in Titan, I would have replaced Scream. That would be my first person I'd cut, even though in theory he's one of the most skilled players in the world. So it's just a different way of thinking about the game on a different end though, not just only who is the least skilled. So along those lines, DDK, overall, what do you think LDLC?
Of LDLC? Well, I just honestly feel like they... The thing is about having star players as well, if you have too many star players, like you could say let's replace Smiths with, you know, Guardian, or replace him with, you know, any other like incredible AWPer,
or replace him with Kaylee or someone,
or Kaylee or Kenny S, like any of these like really like fantastic AWPers. But the thing is that like at the same time, you don't, like with this playstyle, you don't need it. Like you don't need a great AWPer. Like if you look at Fiflaren, for example, like I remember some rounds where on the final against Fnatic, where he was able to like, you know, get the 3 kill spray or something. And the thing is that like everyone's like, oh, you know, Fiflaren's doing it. He's like, everyone says he sucks, but he's like winning the rounds and stuff. And it's like Fiflaren's doing his job. That never changed the time when you said he was shit. Like he's always doing his job and he's doing it well. And like that was like his teammate counter flashed it. Like they had a setup to protect it. Like he's doing all that he needs to do. He's not supposed to be like getting a billion kills. Like if he was Forrest in that situation or Get Right, and let's say he died, well, then that probably would have happened to them as well. If they were in that kind of a position and the counter flash, you know, didn't go well or whatever, you know, they're not going to suddenly magically pull out like 3 frags from their ass or something. It's a lot of situations where you don't necessarily need like ridiculous amounts of skill. Like the actual difference on percentage of like the play being successful or not is actually not very different at all. So it's much more valuable, in fact, to have a player that fits from chemistry perspective, and not to also have too many people who want to do too much. Because if you get like someone that wants to do too much, like you put Kenny S in Smith's role, then you create a huge imbalance in the team, because all of a sudden like he's going to take these like little edges where he's like, oh well, I'm Kenny S, I can get edges like this because I know how good I am. And that's nothing wrong with him. It's just he just won't work with that style, and he won't work with that team. So it's like kind of how I interpret that.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. It's just a lot of it comes down to chemistry and maturity. And these, when you think about these players, you think, okay, MBK and Smith have got a lot of years on the board. Shoxy as well, crazy experience. They're happy. We've seen what he's done with LDLC. He's got crazy experience. It's just like, and then Kirishima is like the young buck. But it really is tough to kind of point out and be like, there's the weak link. You know, just this is where I see this team is not gonna do it. Whereas when I look at Titan, I kind of think that sometimes where I'm just like, well, you know, is Apex gonna butt heads with Existence? Are they gonna agree on how this thing is supposed to run? Because Apex has been the Titan killer. Like, why would he go and join a team that he's consistently destroyed for the past 9 months? Okay, then, you know, like, okay, he's on that team now, but is they actually going to work out? I mean, these are questions that have nothing to do with the game, but more with just, you know, the team. And are they going to be able to play together as a team? That sort of thing. And of course, I think they would say like, of course, we're going to be able to play together with this team. But I don't, you know, you're kind of wondering, you're kind of leery about the whole thing.
There's actually one thing as well. When actually a lot of the losses, because I followed LDLC like quite closely, and a lot of the losses I saw them taking, not all of them, of course, but there seemed to be a correlation between risky AWP play and some maps on the CT side, and then them just getting crushed because they get behind and they get like forced upon like weird economic situation and stuff like that. Because I felt like in that team, Kaylee felt like he had to do more than necessarily he did, and to take risks and stuff like that. I feel like this team, what you have right now is you've got 5 players who are all really hungry. You've got 5 players who's I mean, I haven't I don't know these people, but I get the impression that these are like quite modest players. Like they just want to do well for each other, and they all understand where they fit in the team, and they have the experience, like someone was saying, and they're just really hungry young team. There's no big egos there. I feel like this is a really sick team, to be honest.
Because the thing is, when I defined like when I was breaking up the term star player there, and I'm kind of deciding how do we divide up responsibility? Like who has to get frags in this situation? Who has to just play a specific spot? Who has to just give information in a scenario? This is part of why I have a hierarchy of who are my stars. So I know who's having the pressure on them in this area, who has to do this one specific thing. Sure. In that scenario, okay, part of the way it used to work in 1.6 is if you were designing a team in 1.6 and you were saying, right, well, I need this amount of these fraggers and I need this entry fragger, I need a clutch player. When you were dividing the team up, the way I always used to say it generally worked as a trend as you were designing teams was you actually needed just enough skill to win, and then all the rest had to be like the team play aspect. Because 1.6 was a very tactical game. Like on CT side, it was all about clever rotations and ways to avoid like flashes and stuff, and then on T side it was so positional that you had to have a lot of coordination. So as a result, actually in 1.6 you didn't want a team with like 3-star players. That usually wouldn't work. You had to have a very special set of 3-star players if you were going to make that work, like the Fnatic lineup I was talking about before. That was actually extremely rare. People didn't think that would work when it was set up, because you didn't know how you would make these 3 stars work together. Meanwhile, a lot of the greatest teams ever in 1.6 history had like 1 star, or they had 2 stars, and then the other players were all famous for like one specific type of role play. Like this guy's the middleman, and this guy helps the AWPer, so he's always protected from his rear, and this guy follows up in this way with a flash. Actually, it was that way. Whereas in CSGO, as a general trend, I think it goes the other way. I think it's actually that because it's such an aim-based game and we're playing so fast and loose, a lot of the top teams, you need to have lots of skill, but then you need to have just enough team play. That is like the other dynamic aspect. You have to have just enough. So if you have too much skill, well, you end up like Hellraisers. They have all the skill in the world, but it's like they have excess skill. The extra skill they have from having the 4th guy be able to outfrag everyone doesn't make up for what they lack in not having the team play and the guy covering the right spot and the element of finesse to the tactic. So when I think of it this way, okay, that's why when I break down like who I want as my stars and second star and stuff, well, when I looked at this team on paper, because we're going to get to this next, on paper, I think the LDLC team should be the best of the 3. This should be the best one, and if I set it up the way that I think they would work, I think it would be the best. But I think the way, from what I've heard so far, it hasn't been set up that way, and that's where the question's coming down my mind. So, for example, the reason why I was initially really shocked when I heard NBK was the leader is that, listen, I realize NBK speaks in English, but every time I've heard him speak, and I've watched a lot of interviews and I've seen his comments and blog posts on Facebook, he doesn't come across as a really cerebral player. Like, when he articulates himself, he's not very good at articulating. And like, he couldn't be on the show and talk in these terms we're talking here, okay? He wouldn't break it down like, meta game, this is the way it works, and this is the way a player should work. He might have an answer like, okay, in that scenario, I should have like gone left instead, okay? But here's the thing. Here's where I actually then turned a little bit, because I thought to myself, now you're just wasting talent. He could be a star player in this team, and as a result, then Kiyoshima doesn't have to be a first or second star, which is kind of what the pressure in Epsilon on him was. He always had to join Shoxy as the star, otherwise how can they win? And I think it was a bit too much for Kiyoshima within that lineup. So I was thinking, make NBK the second star, and Kiyoshima can still hang out and do what he did before, and we can maybe win. But if MBK is going to be the in-game leader, odds are he's not going to really be that kind of role, okay? So I'm thinking to myself, well, now you're wasting talent. Why have MBK not be fragging? And crucially, why have Happy just be a player, you know? We've seen this guy's a really good leader. So, but here's where I've kind of like tempered that a bit, even though I'm not totally sold. I actually do think that there's a difference between intelligence in terms of like mental capacity and intelligence in the game. In basketball, they have a great term for this. They call it basketball IQ. And there are some players who, if you talked to outside of a game, they're an idiot, okay? They don't know anything. But in the game, they have a really good intelligence for how to make a decision or knowing a sense of what a teammate should be doing now. And some of that is innate, some of it's practiced, some of it's just like, the basketball makes sense to this guy, okay? But he wouldn't necessarily be able to articulate it to you. Now, actually, NBK is a player like that. In game, I think he's one of the smartest players in the game. I love that guy's versatility. He knows what, like, he's actually one of the players who I think knows what to do at all aspects of the round. The beginning, the middle, the end. He's awesome at that. So if, as Semmler says, maybe Happy has some role in tactic creation before the game starts, and then maybe NBK has an intuitive sense in the game for what should happen. In that scenario, that's a different type of in-game leadership. He's essentially just calling what happens. He's picking out, by reading the game, right, now we should do this.
Yep.
That might work.
Okay. From what I understand and from what I've seen, that's kind of where it's going.
So so I like that.
It's going, and it feels like a much more cooperative effort on their part. It's not one guy who's leading the charge. It's not that second tier, right? Or like first, second, third. It's not just the one man calling the shots. It really does feel like three. Like it's the Shoxy Happy NBK combo with Kiyoshima and Smiths there to back them basically and get their jobs done. And that to me gives them a crazy amount of versatility. And if they're able to actually, like really blend together, which already they seem to be doing, it's I mean, down the line, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to even within the next 3 to 4 months expect big results from them.
But that's the thing for me. For me, the pivotal player is the NBK role, because where I worry, okay, is if NBK is doing this calling, there are some players who can make calling work. But I've never seen a star player within CS who did it okay. So to me, he's either not going to be the star, and he's going to play more of a relaxed role, or he's going to be a star with like looser calling. And so the problem with that role is, not only has it never been done, like anyone now, there's a million idiot fans who are like, Exist is a star player. Like, no, remember when Fiflaren took over as the in-game leader? Exist's level went way down. Because actually, Exist was in his perfect role, sort of doing some killing, but also middle of the round and sort of making calls. That was actually the perfect place for Exist.
I'd throw in Pronax there as the closest to also the style of calling.
But this comes back to it being more spread out and much less demanding on the caller. NBK calls, but he calls at the beginning, he calls at the end, but he also he's calling, but it's still like a very free sort of thing for the team as well to kind of go off and do what they want. It's NBK, it's a NIP, it's a VP. What I imagine is like what you're seeing is it seems like NIP VP sort of style, Dignitas, where they're just kind of doing their thing and then they all kind of agree on it. So that still gives freedom for NBK to walk around and get some shots.
Like fairly predetermined sort of thing.
We can't take Happy too lightly either, because that guy has already proven that he can have strong performances of his own in his own right, and he's very, very smart at how he approaches the game. So, yeah. Okay,
so let's imagine that NBK does this calling style. Now, it could work, but okay, I know most people don't watch League of Legends, but I'll give a quick example from League of Legends in case anyone does. In League of Legends recently, the team who won the North American LCS, this team TSM, actually their star player is the in-game leader, this guy Bjergsen. if he just plays a star role and you don't make him shot call, he's one of the most skilled players in the entire Western world. He's amazing, right? The problem was, part of their problem as a team was they spent the whole season sort of breaking him into becoming the shot caller. And actually, even up to the final and the semi-final, he was making these plays where if he'd have not been the shot caller, he'd have been way more aggressive and he'd have like outplayed an opponent and pushed their advantage even further. But because he was the in-game leader, it's like he kept transferring his thoughts. This is why stars usually aren't in-game leaders. Stars have to tunnel vision on their crosshair, their game, what's happening to them, where's the enemy, how am I going to outplay and what am I going to do now? So
why is NBK a star for you?
No, I think he should be, is my point within this line.
Oh, okay.
He might not necessarily be, and he wasn't in Titan, but I would.
Wasn't in Titan. No. I think that he's perfectly happy being the kind of jack of all trades that you
Sure, but to me, I would put him as that role. So anyway, my point here is, within this team, what I worry about is either can he provide enough fragging while doing this role to make it work? Like maybe his in-game calling awesome, but it's not making his actual game have enough impact. Or secondly, will he fall into the Bjergsen trap that Bjergsen fell in with you, which was sometimes because he kept coming sort of out of the individual level and up to the group perspective, he'd be too busy thinking about what his teammates are doing that he wouldn't make the individual play okay. Like he was more hesitant to take a risk himself because he's thinking, if I go in and die now, then I haven't been able to give information to these people first. And then so sometimes he'd be like trying to go between the macro and the micro constantly like that. Whereas actually, I don't know many players that do that. That's why I say I don't think stars usually do it. So there's two ways this can go. Either NBK is going to be quite loose in the tactics and he'll still have a star impact. Either he won't need to be and maybe Kiyoshima can flourish into a star. And that way it's not even required of NBK to kill more. But that's why the two X factors for me is NBK, how will he handle the shot calling? Will it hinder his own game? And secondly, can Kiyoshima become the player everyone wants him to be? Like ever since Clan Mystic became awesome, well, not awesome. Whatever since they won that ESWC, okay, you looked at that lineup and you're like, okay, Kiyoshima and Kaylee are the two best players in this team. But ever since, they never delivered on that level again. Partly because I think Kiyoshima, like I said, he's never been able to consistently be a superstar player. You know, he's always like he's gotten up there, then he falls back down again. Then he has an average game, and you're like, yeah, the average game was okay, but I needed a bigger game this game. Okay, so to me, they're the two X factors: NBK's calling and Kiyoshima's performance.
I think the fact that Kiyoshima has the role now to be able to do that because he's been set, he has the freedom. He has the freedom to be able to actually build up to that superstar thing, not like he had on Epsilon, where Epsilon it was kind of everybody doing everything and everybody like there was no like everybody kind of wanted to play that role of like the star basically. They wanted to have 5 stars on the team, and apart from Shoxy, who's trying to just basically keep everything under control. And so now he's on a team where he's just got these players who have so much experience in the game and making sure that, you know, they aren't going to make the mistakes that are going to cost Kiyoshima anything, or that it's kind of tough to explain.
Well, put it this way: the reason why I haven't bought my ticket and had it stamped for the Kiyoshima train that he's going to be the next good player, okay, is because in general, I never bet on unproven things, okay? Like, I'm totally willing to experimentation. Like, when Kenny S was trying that crazy style in Titan where they were playing off his pick style, initially I said to myself, this is fucking crazy. What are you doing? Like, your strength in Titan is existence, having that certain style and making people fit that. I thought, this isn't going to work. But you know what? Nothing's working at the moment. Try it out. Try it for 3 events. See what happens. I'm open to trying it, but I'll never put my money down that'll work. Like, I'll never put my money down that a guy who chokes.
Do you trust Shoxy? Do you trust Shoxy, Thorin?
Not really. That's the problem.
You don't trust Shoxy, Thorin, but you say he's best player of the world, man.
No, that's the key thing.
Best player of the world?
If Shoxy has the right team, like when Very Games was awesome, and if this lineup was put together correctly, then Shoxy would be the best player in the world. He'd be better than Get Right. But right now, I know exactly what Get Right's going to give me if you give him a whole tournament. I know when he'll come up, the games they'll be big in, I actually don't know the situations that Shoxy will be mega in at the moment. It's been like 6 months since I saw him.
Get Right doesn't even know when he's going to deliver for you, dude. Get Right's been like super inconsistent throughout the past 6 months. He's been like way under the level. I think it's been a huge personal like struggle for him to get up to a level again where he feels comfortable. And thank fuck for Nip that he found it in the finals. Like that was it. It was Freiburg who did a lot of the work at Gamescom, but Get Right is definitely not. I think it's just like it's still this whole process of them learning how to lose or learning how to deal with the fact that everybody else is really catching up now and finding that third tier and becoming more and more of a threat. And so Nip are feeling more and more pressured, and they're falling back on the chemistry to carry them up there. But on a personal level, you saw them really like mixing things up and really trying a lot of new things out. Actually, Did you see that the Pro 90s, the way that like Nuke and the way that they were holding Nuke and Get Right not playing Get Right style on Nuke, like he was swapping, he was holding from below hell, like he was doing all sorts of weird things that you never see Get Right do, and like you could see that they were actively looking to try and find like what is it that's not working for us right now.
Didn't they get kind of crushed? They got crushed on Nuke against Cloud9 as well, didn't they? They like got crushed on the CT side, and I was like, "What the fuck am I watching? What is happening here?"
God damn it! There were so many good games. I'm blanking. Point being is like Get Right found it. Like Nip were able to play Nip in the finals, and that's the crazy thing about Nip, I guess. Again, it's like you think struggling, you think that the players are struggling individually, and then all of a sudden in the finals when it matters most, and it's like all the money is down on the table.
That's the thing, right?
So okay, Semmler, let me just get this straight. You can't know what to expect from Get Right, but in the finals in the big games, he somehow delivers and wins the tournament for you. Okay, so you can't rely on that at all, though, right?
Oh yeah, right. So you're gonna count on Freiburg. You're gonna count on like if I'm looking to Get Right to fill out a role, if you're saying he is the best player in the world and he is going to deliver every fucking game, it didn't happen until
no one delivers every game, but Get Right fails less in pressure moments than anyone else.
Yeah, this is like a really big deal because again, like this point, look at Dignitas from the recent events, look at LDLC from the recent couple big events. Those are the teams that should have won events, but NIP, like they peak, like peaking at the right time in a tournament is like a skill of its own.
I can just see Thorin smile right now. You say because that was his thing at DreamHack.
Right, yeah.
They played really good.
It's so true though. Like in Quake, there was some you probably met Fox, right?
Yeah.
Fox, right, was this guy that was incredibly smart and really, really like amazingly like mechanically gifted at the game, and he was so consistent in that respect. But from like a peaking perspective, he would crush groups and always fall out at the semis. Like psychologically, there was always
because
something
here's the thing, DDK. Fox is Dignitas. Okay, Dignitas on paper have like 3 tournaments they should have won, and that they were. Here's the thing, right? Dignitas have players whose average level is actually better than the slumping Get Right of the last 6 months that Semmler's talking about now. If you make them play 10 opponents and you make them play 30 games total, they'll have like 25 that are awesome. You know the problem? The 5 that they're going to do shit on will all be in the semi-finals against anyone. But that's when they'll all. So here's my point. The difference is Get Right can have the 20 bad maps, but he'll have the 10 that are the deciders that win you the games, that win you the series, that win you the tournament. He's not reliable in the sense that every game you get it, but I mean there's something about Get Right that I always know will come through in the end. The difference is, with like a Kiyoshima, with the Scream, I don't know when I'll get the good round from them, you know. I don't know when I'll get the good map from them. It's hard to know.
It's true. It is hard to know. And I'll give you that. I think Freiburg is like the unsung hero for Nip. Really, like that guy is my consistent go-to guy. Basically, like him and Forrest, but like Freiburg in particular is just ridiculously consistent for Nip, and I think a lot of their recent performance comes from him. Like he has been delivering on entries, delivering on clutches, just playing out of his mind. That one round on fucking Cobble versus Cloud9, him hiding by the cannons, all that sort of stuff. Like it's like he came up with all of the rounds basically that allowed Nip to get through those playoffs. Like he had just clutch after clutch.
He's like a big playmaker. Like that's how I would call him sometimes, because you don't necessarily see him like doing the clutch or something necessarily.
The press, like nobody's, it's like
he makes it all possible.
But he makes it, exactly. That's the thing. He's the one who makes it possible for Nip, I feel. And then Get Right with his sleuth position. He just has to play it smart and keep his cool. Forrest is just really like he's like more up there now again with the rifling, but like Freiburg is just proving to be this beast, just this outright beast. Like he is a guy that you watch throughout 2015 because he's going to deliver hard for Nip. He is going to be this unstoppable force. The King of Banana is back, people.
Okay, so we've talked about these 2 lineups. One, no one quite knows what to expect, but some very skilled players. Another, really skilled players, we have more of an idea. Now we get to the 3rd lineup, and I know this is where Semmler, with his friendships and being French and all that shit.
What was this? The leftovers?
You ready to get offended, Semmler? So
I'm not offended in any way, because I'll probably be more harsh than you will.
Okay, so when DDK asked me on air, like DDK, I think he's like a masochist in a way, because he sort of asks me questions that I know as it's escaping his mouth, he wants to grab back, like, wait a minute, Thorin will answer that in a really inappropriate way. Oh God, please stop! But it's gone, it's out. And so he asked me 2 questions that might blow blow your fucking mind if you think like me. First of all, he asked me, like, what do you make of this lineup? And so I said to him, quite frankly, like, well, this is the leftovers, you know? These are the other two teams picked the best players they could, and like, oh, I haven't got NBK, right, give me Kaylee. Like, they were picking in their best pieces, and then what happened is there was 5 players left over, and Scream, 4 players in Scream, and then no one wanted Scream for reasons I've mentioned before, and so they were like, you know what? We're shit, but we're the best 4 left, so we'll stick together. We're the leftovers. And then Scream was like, well, I'm actually skilled, but I'm also a leftover. Can I join your like sad little group? And he came along, and as a result, I think I have no expectations for this team ever doing well. Like, to me, this team is like a much worse version of those Epsilon and Kenny S Recursive and Shox Epsilon teams I was talking about, where, you know, I wanted it to be like the Shox and Kenny S show, and I know they're going to lose, but at least they can go ham. In this team, because I think Scream's inconsistent, I think it's going to be like a worse version of that, because you've got a worse star, but who can go ham every now and then you've got a bunch of role players who aren't even really that well defined as like a, it's not like the LDLC really good core, or even like Epsilon players who are trying their best even if they can't do it. It's like you've just got leftovers. So to me, this team's like a fucking million levels below the other two.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, we'll get into this later, but his second question he asked me, and he asked me it with the most dear little innocent straight face. He said, you think Uzi's a good player? And I was like, are you even kidding me right now? So anyway, that was my general opening gambit. And I hope it goes without saying, Semmler, I said that Uzi fucking sucks and he's not a good player, and that, yeah, sometimes he does okay, but he's not a good player. Like, don't ever tell me he's as good as any of the players in fucking Titan and LDLC for a start off.
No, I won't.
Anyone want to jump in on these 2 points?
I won't tell you that. The thing is that I mean, you'd be kidding yourself if you told yourself that, because LDLC, they knew full well that they were bringing on an untested or a player that they knew was not going to be at the level, but that they were confident in being able to build up to that level.
Okay.
And they took them on full on knowing that, and we actually saw, I think, throughout this year of LDLC, or the previous LDLC lineup, we saw Uzi flourish, because he at the start, not good at all, but you know, going into the mid towards the end, we started seeing some better and better play out of him. So, like, I don't know if it was just the team itself, everybody, like the cohesiveness of that team, you know, everybody coming together, right, and they're all kind of going up together, and everybody's getting better together and all that jazz. But like, it felt like we were seeing better and better play out of Uzi.
That's a key thing, by the way, and I've never denied this. His level of play definitely improved this year. Yeah. Last year, at the end of last year, it was perfectly acceptable. Like, here's what's funny, okay? People always used to put him in the category where it was remember the 3 players, it was Fiflaren, Existence, and Uzi. And what happened is every time their team lost and they had the bad score, they're the 3 who had the targets on their back. Okay, these are the 3 that should be cut and retire, and they're bad. Here's the difference. With Fiflaren, first of all, his team's winning. Therefore, actually, there's way less reason to replace him and way less likely evidence that he isn't doing his job. With Existence, he's doing some awesome shot calling. Like, he's so integral to the team that, again, it's going to be a drastic change to move it. Uzi's teams, when he was bad, which he was, weren't even that good as teams anyway. So first of all, they didn't have any options to who to get instead. And secondly, what do you expect from him? His star players weren't doing that great in those teams. They were just average. Those were like 9th to 10th level teams he was playing, you know. They weren't supposed to be mega. But the key thing is, he definitely had a role in LDLC. Now, the old LDLC, obviously. I've always made this point. Nearly every pro player who's at the pro level and has been there for a few years could work in the right lineup. Like, there's players I think aren't very good. Fiflaren's an obvious example, okay? He's got exactly the right lineup for him to play in. Any other type of lineup, like if you took him and threw him in the old LGB, the one that had 5 aimers, basically. Take any of those aimers out and put him in, that'd be fucking terrible, because their whole style was like run and gun, super fast, high pace, everyone shoots. That style, he'd look really bad in. Put him in the old Fnatic, maybe he'd be alright in that team. Maybe that's closer to his lineup. But the NIP team, obviously, we can see from the results, this is the best team for his style. In Uzi's case, I agree. The old LDLC I thought was a really great team. I would have never thought you could use him in that way. It worked. But when you look at this team now, I think this team's terrible, dude.
They don't have... there's no getting around it, you know. It was the team, they got put together basically because the other 2 teams decided that they were going to run with those lineups. And then these guys got left out in the cold. And they got left out to dry. And now they've just decided to band together and that they're gonna take a shot at it. And
like, that's the problem, isn't it?
That's the thing. It's just like there is no option for them. It's like they want to keep going, and the only way for them to keep going is to get the experience, so that eventually maybe either they get this team up to a point where it's competitive, or, you know, they get picked up again by a top team or something like that. Like, I feel like that's kind of where these guys are at right now, because there's a reason why they got out.
Like, think of the way we... Look, I just got a quick point here. Think of the way we were breaking down the other two teams. We kept trying to think, what is the rationale of what they want to do here? Why did they pick up this player? If you look at this team, that's the problem with it. That's why I say leftovers, and it is a derogatory term. Because the idea is here, none of these players would have said, right, here's my dream team. I want this player, this player. And so actually, they've got some players where they don't have certain roles filled. And they have two players who you'd want doing the same role. And they have one player here who doesn't make sense and who's the shot caller. And, you know, that's what's a mess about it.
Probably. That's the thing. You go through the whole thing. You're like, okay, Fox isn't calling, or FXO. Scream, definitely not. It's just you know, SF and GMX, right? I mean, it's got to be GMX. Like that's it. You know, he's the only guy because he's called for Epsilon in the past. So you're thinking, okay, GMX he's got some personality. He's going to be able to like bring these guys together. But that's what I think these guys are desperately needing right now. And what Shoxy brought the old Epsilon lineup was, you know, the experience that of his years playing on a top team. He brought that with him to start, you know, passing that off to these guys. Only problem is they don't have one of those guys anymore, apart from perhaps Uzi and Scream, who could potentially bring over what they learned from Titan and LDLC to this team. But it would just take a sick amount of work, basically. Just a ridiculous amount of work.
No offense to Scream, but I'm not sure he learned that much useful stuff in Titan. I think he might be the one guy who's like, yeah, that's like the 60s for him. He's like, man, Titan was all a blur. I'm not sure what was happening. Like, I don't know who I was with, what was going on. I just remember there was some good times, some bad times. It's the 70s now. I'm a new working girl. Like, you know, come on, DDK, jump in here. We know you got some thoughts, motherfucker.
God.
All right. So with this team, it is
every time
like
DDK sighs or goes, that means he doesn't want to say something mean, but he knows that there's no other scenario now. So go ahead, go ahead.
Well, this team is as it is. Like, it's hard to see a future with this team. Like, they are the leftovers. Like, they don't stand out in any way particularly at all, like the other two lineups do. Like, the first lineup we talked about, you can say, well, this lineup does, okay, it has some issues, but they can make it work. Like, there is very tangible ways they can create solutions for any problems that they may have, and they can be a solid team. And obviously, you know, LDLC, their lineup is sick, but this is just something completely different. And the thing is that I've actually been in their position before, where you know, the team Slackers, Thorin, from this is actually where the whole like analysis thing came from for me. Like, what changed me as a player completely, and then as a guy that looks at games, was actually the fact that like my like star player essentially in my team, he was like second to me at that point in Quakecore, got poached by Slackers. And this guy had been playing for years. He's a super talent, and he got poached. And so I had nobody to like make up of 14 years of experience, like perhaps Shoxy like was doing before for Epsilon. So I like that got taken away from me. I couldn't do that. I couldn't join a better team. It was just me trying to make up for experience, for like all the experience I didn't have. So the only thing that I could do, and it took like a year, was to just be like, all right, let's take this as a project and just let's see if analysis can trump like experience. And
it can to a degree.
The answer is yes, but it takes time, and it takes a lot of dedication and commitment from the team. And
it takes a sick amount of work.
It takes a huge amount of work, but it can definitely be done. Now the question is, and I feel that is the only option for these guys. And I don't know whether or not they have the chops to go for that approach, or the commitment, or whether, you know, after a couple months of like bad results, they'll just be like, well, we'll just all like stop playing. Yeah. And you'll see them resurface again in like 8 months with a new lineup somewhere else.
And by the way, like, think of when Kenny S was in that recursive lineup as well, which had more stars than this. But okay, when he was the star in a bad team in theory, the same thing will happen, I guarantee, which is this team will go to a LAN, and I bet they win a map off a big team. And I bet they have one game where Screen goes so nuts, everyone's like, wow, maybe they could be really good. The difference is that won't be consistent at all, and they won't ever be able to get those deep runs, because that's what gets you the deep runs, the consistency, you know. In Dignitas, if Device doesn't do that well, they have like Dupree, they have Zipnet, they have all these other players who can do it as well. If Scream doesn't go crazy in these games for this team, they're not going to get past big teams, especially not in best of 3.
This is that team. Sorry, go for it. Go for it.
Well, no, they're a CT team essentially, because they don't have anybody to put it together for them on the T side. I think that's the big thing. And didn't they get like 11 rounds versus NIP on Inferno their first night?
They got a few, yeah.
Yeah. They got 11 rounds, I think. I think it was 11 rounds on their CT side of Inferno. But then
I think it was what's his face, Forrest. He was getting DDoS or something like that.
Yeah, but Nip still won the game.
Nip still won the game, but a lot of it came down to Scream having a ridiculously sick CT side.
Oh yeah.
But when it comes to holding angles and making sure that you land the shots, that's where Scream will always shine. But now we have to see, are they going to be able to actually, make the right calls when it comes to T side? And that's going to be the real struggle for this team, I think, is finding somebody that can lead them on the T side, that tells them this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it, and from here on out, this is how it is.
Actually, they have there's like a bit of luck, a bit of fortune for them right now, because we already briefly spoke. I spoke with Thorin about this very briefly previously. This new format for Face It, and let's not forget that they're actually in Face It, so they can take advantage of this format. So this is the team that should be, in theory, working their fucking asses off, looking at demos and trying to go for the full, okay, we will prepare for this team a week ahead of time on this map. We will prepare for them. This is the team that needs that the most out of any other team, and they can that can be an edge for them if they do it well. So I'll be curious to see what their performance is like, whether they put that effort in. It's hard to say because being the leftovers, you have to be quite aware of that. And how do they actually even feel like that? If they all join the team thinking, okay, we there was just no one else. If it was that, and not I really want to fucking play with this guy and this guy and this guy. Those are two completely different
scenarios.
Things. Yeah, that's so different.
I mean, that's kind of what we have to see right now. It does feel like right now they're in the hospital bed, and we're just waiting to see if they're gonna fight through it, or if they're gonna succumb.
Plus, you've also got this horrible scenario for the players in that team where, because to some degree they must know they're the leftovers, they know there's two possibilities that are real distinct possibilities. One is the team does so badly, Scream just retires and says, right, I'm done. I can't play for anyone good, so I'm retiring. Here's the worst one. It goes so well that someone just poaches Scream and then you've lost the star player. So actually, they're stuck in a horrible middle ground. In fact, here's what's funny. I actually hope that's why I said I know for sure Scream will have games where he goes crazy. I've seen this phenomenon happen loads in CS. I really hope that there's not some French LAN that all these teams go to, and Scream has one LAN where he goes crazy at this small LAN, and then as a result, LDLC kicks out Kiyoshima or Titan kicks out Kaylee, and they're like, Scream, come back, you've got to join us again. Because that would actually be the wrong move. In the short term, you'd think it was the right move, but it's one of those looking long term, it'd be the wrong move. I want actually Titan and LDLC to keep these lines for minimum 6 months, guys. You've got to fully try this.
Yeah,
they will. Sure. They will. I'd be amazed at this point if they actually made any kind of roster changes at all.
That was actually the sad thing as well about seeing, because for me, when I looked at the old LDLC lineup, the sad thing for me wasn't that let's say they split up and they were doing really well. It was just that the story had is irrelevant now, because they had all this history of building up and grinding games, and then boom, all of a sudden team's gone,
shattered,
and that's it. The storyline is gone, and storylines are really important to having any kind of that's why StarCraft can be so good. StarCraft has some incredible storylines because it's just one guy you got to worry about. It's not a group of dudes, so it's much easier.
Now it's the different storyline though, dude, and it's actually one that's kind of interesting as well.
It is really fun.
The different storyline is now that one of these teams was created with winning tournaments in mind. And that was it. They weren't, they were just let's stop fucking around with this 5 to 8 bullshit. It's time to make a team that wins.
Yeah.
So let's see if they actually do.
By the way, that's what I actually like about what you told me about the shocks the NBK aspect, where actually he's the one that in theory Titan didn't kick. They were going to keep him in the lineup. But essentially, to me, that suggests to me that actually he identified kind of what I was saying. That actually the core aspect they had was fine. Him, Existence and Smith to some degree was working okay. The stars, maybe they had some problems integrating. So instead what he's essentially seen, whether he had or didn't, is okay, just bringing in these LDLC stars isn't going to fix the problem that we had before. That's not necessarily going to make us the best team again. So if that's going to happen, well, fuck it. If you're kicking Smiths as well, that was one of the parts that was working in the team. I'll go with Smiths. And not only that, I'll go to Shocks, who I know is the teammate that I could always rely on when he was in the team, and he was really good. And that's actually, essentially he's making the choice. That's the better path to go. Because he's the only one who had the choice really between the two, He could have gone either way, stay or go. And so I actually like that. I think he made the right decision to go. Whether his team becomes the best or not, I think on paper at the time, it's the right decision.
It's just it's the right decision. It's going to be really interesting to see. That's why it's so exciting to see this LDLC lineup. You had that moment where you're just oh man, but now it's actually you're starting to recover somewhat and get into like the, oh yes, okay, sweet, like this is going to be cool.
You know, the first game is between for LDLC, the new LDLC lineup.
They're going to be on Cash. It's going to be on Cash versus Titan.
The next, what tournament is that?
That's for you guys. Face it.
Is it Face It? What?
Yeah. Face it. They play Titan on Cash, don't they?
No, it should be. I'm looking at the schedule. It says NIP on Inferno, Wednesday, September 10th.
Yeah, but what about Thursday?
Thursday is Titan on Cash.
Yeah.
Cash is such an awesome map. I feel like a lot of teams don't play that right.
Don't worry, that's the first match you look for, man. That's the first match you look for. When are LDLC and Titan playing? When is it happening? Because you know there's gonna be so much on the line in that match. Like, it's not about face, it's not about any fucking thing, not money, whatever. It's about who's gonna come out with the win there in that match. That's gonna be so good.
And this is actually another thing as well. Like, NIP aren't necessarily that interesting in like kind of group-ish stages. We've seen this before, that like they don't necessarily perform like their best and stuff. But when their NIP is like fucking amazing to watch. When like there's a serious like tournament pressure at a LAN or something, when the pressure's on, they're so amazing to watch. But so I guess we can kind of skip over the NIP bit. But yeah, that's gonna be pretty fucking awesome. And I'm happy that it's Cash. I love Cash.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think Titan are very happy that it's Cash.
This episode is long as fuck already, so let's close up. Do we have any final thoughts on these teams or something we've discussed here, Semmler?
I think final thoughts, I guess, is, you know, the hierarchy, at least is the way that it sits with me right now, is LDLC, Titan, and then Epsilon. I think that actually kind of sets actually what kind of ties in nicely with what we've been talking about all night as well, with the leading, the way things are going for teams, like the top teams to the teams that are coming up, where it's like that the third tier of leadership, the second tier of leadership, and the first tier of leadership that we talked about at the beginning. I think that actually highlights it fairly nicely here with these three teams now, and we get to see exactly, you know, where this goes. So I think it's really exciting times, man. I'm glad that we actually got to chew the fat for a little bit, because I do think that, you know, these teams and what we talked about deserved, you know, the 3 hours. So I'm glad that we actually got to go ahead. Thanks for bringing us on, man.
DDK?
Yeah, I basically agree with Semmler. To keep it short for your closing thoughts, I just want to thank you for letting me on the show. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully I get to talk more bollocks about CS in the future with you guys. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, I don't have any final thoughts. I'm great. So if you don't think so, go fuck yourself. End of the episode.